Hi everyone, welcome back to Animind. I hope you're all doing well. Today I want to make the case that Demon Slayer Kimetsu no Yaiba is not a bad anime, but it might just be the most overrated one ever made. And I don't say that lightly. What I want to argue is that Demon Slayer has been propped up by three things that have very little to do with great storytelling. Ufotable's animation, which is genuinely some of the best we've ever seen in anime, a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic box, Office Miracle that turned Mugen Train into a global record breaker, and a fan base that has confused massive commercial success with actual creative greatness. And when you peel back those three layers, what you find underneath is a bland protagonist who never really grows, a main villain who is somehow less interesting than his own henchman, a female lead who the show literally will not allow to speak, story that follows the shonen formula step by step without ever trying to do anything new with it, and a manga that was rushed to an ending before it had the chance to fully develop the characters and arcs that fans fell in love with. That's the argument. That's what we're going to be breaking down across this entire video. But before we begin, I'd just like to kindly ask you all to subscribe. It's completely free, and it really helps us improve the videos for this wonderful community we've managed to build. Anyway, that's enough. Let's begin. The phenomenon. Understanding why we're even having this conversation. Now, before I can criticize Demon Slayer, I need to be honest about something first. This anime is not just popular. It is one of the most commercially successful entertainment properties on the planet. And understanding the sheer size of what we're talking about is important, because it's that gap between how big this thing is and how strong its actual storytelling is that makes this conversation worth having in the first place. So let's just lay out the facts, because the numbers are kind of insane. As of July 2025, the Demon Slayer manga has sold over 220 million copies worldwide. That puts it at the number 4 spot on the all-time best-selling manga list. The only series ahead of it are One Piece, Dragon Ball, and Naruto, three of the most legendary manga in history. And here's the thing that makes Demon Slayer's position on that list genuinely wild. It did it in just 23 volumes. One Piece has over 100 volumes. Dragon Ball has 42. Naruto has 72. Demon Slayer told its story in 23 and still climbed past Bleach, Slam Dunk, and a bunch of other series that had decades of head start. When you break that down to an average per volume, Demon Slayer is selling close to 10 million copies per volume. One Piece, the best-selling manga of all time, sits at around 5 million per volume. So, on a per-volume basis, Demon Slayer is actually outpacing every manga ever made. That's not a small detail. That's a pretty massive statement about just how fast and how hard this series took over the manga world. And then there's the anime side. The Demon Slayer anime debuted in 2019, animated by Studio Ufotable, and it was an immediate sensation. But it was the Mugen Train movie in 2020 that really changed everything. That film made over $504 million at the worldwide box office. It became the highest-grossing film of 2020. Not the highest-grossing anime film, not the highest-grossing Japanese film, the highest-grossing film period, across the entire world. And that had literally never happened before. No non-Hollywood production had ever topped the annual global box office in the entire history of cinema. Demon Slayer did it with an animated movie about a boy fighting demons on a train. In Japan alone, the movie was breaking records left and right. It made over $100 million in just 10 days, which was the fastest any film had ever hit that mark in Japanese box office history. It knocked Spirited Away off the throne as the highest-grossing Japanese film of all time, a record that had stood since 2001. Some theaters in Japan were playing the movie up to 40 times a day, and it sat at number 1 at the Japanese box office for 12 straight weeks. But even that wasn't the ceiling. In 2025, the Infinity Castle movie came along and broke Mugen Train's records. That film crossed $555 million worldwide, making it the new highest-grossing anime film of all time. It beat out Mugen Train, Your Name, Spirited Away, and Suzume. It also became the highest-grossing anime opening weekend in North American history. So just to keep track, Demon Slayer now holds the record for both the highest and the second highest-grossing anime films ever made. And we still have 2 more Infinity Castle movies on the way. On the manga sales side, the dominance is just as clear. In 2020, Demon Slayer sold over 82 million manga copies in Japan alone in a single year. That ended One Piece's 11-year streak as the top-selling manga in the country. 11 years. One Piece had been sitting on that throne for over a decade, and Demon Slayer just walked in and took it. And even years after the manga ended in 2020, it continued to sell at an insane pace. It was still the best-selling manga of 2023, 3 full years after the final chapter was published. Most manga series see their sales drop off a cliff once they end. Demon Slayer just kept going. So those are the numbers, and I'm not listing them to discredit them. These numbers are real, they're verified, and they represent something genuinely impressive. No matter what I think about the quality of the storytelling, I would never try to pretend that Demon Slayer's success isn't earned on some level. Millions and millions of people around the world connected with this series. That means something. But here's the thing, and this is really the core of what this entire video is about. Success and quality are not the same thing. They're related sometimes, sure, but they are not the same thing. Something can be wildly popular and still be deeply flawed. Something can break every record in the book and still not deserve to be called a masterpiece. And I think that's exactly where Demon Slayer sits. Because when you look at the way people talk about this series online, especially newer anime fans, Demon Slayer isn't just treated as a good show. It's treated as one of the greatest anime of all time. You'll see it ranked alongside Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, alongside Attack on Titan, alongside Hunter x Hunter. You'll see fans argue that it deserves to replace one of the original big three shonen, alongside One Piece and Naruto. And to be fair, some of those arguments are based on the sales numbers I just went through. On paper, Demon Slayer has the resume to be in that conversation. But the question I keep coming back to is this: is it actually that good? Not that successful, not that popular, not that well animated, but that good? As a story, as a piece of writing, as a narrative that challenges you, surprises you, makes you think, and leaves you with something that sticks with you long after the screen goes dark. And for me, the honest answer is no, not even close. And I think a big part of why people resist that conclusion is because they've been conditioned to see big numbers as proof of quality. If it sold that much, it must be amazing. If the movie made that much money, the story must be incredible. If everyone's watching it, it must be one of the best. But that logic doesn't hold up. It has never held up. The biggest selling fast food chain in the world is McDonald's. That doesn't make it the best food. The most streamed song in a given year is not always the best song. The highest grossing movie of a given year is not always the best movie. Popularity tells you about reach. It tells you about accessibility. It tells you about marketing and timing and cultural momentum. It does not automatically tell you about depth, and that's the gap I want to explore. Because here's what I think actually happened with Demon Slayer. I think Ufotable created some of the most beautiful animation in anime history, and wrapped it around a story that is, at its core, perfectly fine. Not bad, not great, just fine. A simple story told simply, with incredible visuals. And because the visuals were so good, and because the anime arrived at the perfect time, and because the manga was short enough that anyone could jump in and catch up quickly, and because the movie came out during a global pandemic when people were desperate for something to watch, and there was literally nothing else in theaters, all of these things came together to create a perfect storm. A perfect storm that launched Demon Slayer into a place where its reputation outgrew its actual quality. And now we're in a situation where pointing that out, we're saying, hey, this show has some real problems. Feels like you're attacking something sacred. Because the fan base is so massive and so invested that any criticism feels like a personal attack. But it's not. Criticizing something you enjoy doesn't mean it's bad. It means you care enough to be honest about it. And honestly, I think Demon Slayer fans deserve that honesty. Because the people who made this show clearly put incredible effort into the animation, into the music, into the voice acting. That effort deserves to be respected. But it also deserves to be evaluated fairly. And fair evaluation means looking at the whole picture, not just the parts that look pretty. So that's where we are. Demon Slayer is one of the biggest anime of all time. That's a fact. But the question of whether it's one of the best anime of all time? That's a very different conversation. And it's the one we're going to have across the rest of this video. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Now, the first and probably the most common criticism you'll hear about Demon Slayer is that the animation is carrying the whole show. And when you actually dig into the evidence, that claim is a lot harder to dismiss than fans want to admit. Section 2. The Ufotable question. Is the animation carrying the entire series? If you've ever been in any kind of online discussion about Demon Slayer, whether that's on Reddit, on Twitter, on TikTok, in YouTube comments, anywhere, you've almost definitely come across this one specific criticism. And it goes something like this. Demon Slayer is carried by its animation. Take away Ufotable, and you've got a mid-anime at best. Now, Demon Slayer fans hate hearing this, and honestly, I understand why. Because it feels reductive. It feels like you're dismissing everything the show does well and boiling it down to one thing. But the reason this criticism keeps coming up year after year from casual viewers and hardcore anime fans alike is because there is a genuine mountain of evidence behind it. And I think if we're being fair and if we're being honest, we need to sit with that evidence for a minute and really examine what it's telling us. So let's start with what happened before the anime even existed, because this part of the story is really important and it doesn't get talked about enough. The Demon Slayer manga, written and illustrated by Koyoharu Gotoge, started running in Weekly Shonen Jump in February of 2016. Now, Weekly Shonen Jump is the single biggest manga magazine in the world. This is the magazine that gave us One Piece, Naruto, Dragon Ball, Bleach, My Hero Academia, and dozens of other legendary series. Getting serialized in Jump is a big deal on its own. But here's the thing. When Demon Slayer first started running, it was not a massive hit. It was doing fine. It had a readership, people were enjoying it, but it was not the kind of series that was dominating the magazine or setting the world on fire. It was a middle-of-the-pack Shonen Jump title. By the time Volume 14 came out, the manga was selling around 150,000 copies per volume within the first few weeks. That's a solid number. That's a series that is doing well enough to keep going. But it's not a runaway smash. It's not even close to the numbers that series like One Piece or My Hero Academia were pulling at the time. And then in April of 2019, the anime dropped, animated by Ufotable. And everything changed. Almost overnight, after the anime started airing, manga sales didn't just go up, they exploded. Volume 16, which came out after the anime had been running for a few months, sold 225,000 copies in just 4 days. That's a massive jump from where the series had been. And it just kept going from there. By 2020, Demon Slayer was the best-selling manga in all of Japan, moving over 82 million copies in a single year. The same manga that had been performing modestly for 3 years was suddenly outselling every other manga on the planet. And the only thing that changed between those two realities was the anime adaptation. The story was the same. The characters were the same. The plot was the same. What was different was how it looked. What was different was Ufotable. Now let's talk about what Ufotable actually did to this series, because to their credit, what they accomplished is genuinely remarkable. Ufotable took a manga with decent but not extraordinary artwork and turned it into one of the most visually stunning anime productions ever created. They used a mix of traditional hand-drawn animation and modern computer-generated imagery that blended together in a way that very few studios had ever pulled off. The way they animated the breathing styles in particular was something that changed the game. When Tanjiro uses water breathing, you see this gorgeous flowing water effect wrap around his sword and his body. When Zenitsu uses thunder breathing, there's this burst of lightning that rips across the screen. When Rengoku uses flame breathing, the entire frame lights up with these vibrant reds and oranges. These weren't just fight scenes, they were full-blown visual spectacles. And every single season, Ufotable raised the bar even higher. The fight between Tanjiro and Rui in Season 1. The battle against Daki and Gyutaro in the Entertainment District arc, Rengoku versus Akaza in the Mugen Train movie. These are scenes that people who don't even watch anime have seen clips of because they're that visually impressive. They get shared millions of times on social media, they trend on Twitter, they get reaction videos with millions of views. And almost every time one of these clips goes viral, the conversation is the same. Look at this animation, this is insane! Ufotable is the best studio in the world. And you know what? That might actually be true. When it comes to raw animation quality, Ufotable might genuinely be the best in the business right now. The problem is that this praise almost always circles back to the animation, and very rarely extends to the writing, the plot, or the characters with the same enthusiasm. And this is where the argument starts to get really interesting. Because if Demon Slayer's success is mostly about the animation, then you would expect other anime with amazing animation but weaker stories to have similar levels of success. And they don't. This is one of the strongest counter-arguments Demon Slayer fans bring up, and it's a fair point. There are anime out there that look absolutely incredible, but never came close to Demon Slayer's popularity. God of High School is one example. That show had some seriously impressive fight animation. It looked fantastic. But the story was a mess. The pacing was all over the place. Characters were introduced and thrown away before you could care about them. And as a result, it came and went without making a real lasting impact. Guilty Crown is another example. Beautiful animation, stunning character designs, great music, but the story fell apart, and the show is remembered more as a disappointment than as a success. Tact Op Destiny, same thing. Gorgeous production values, but the story couldn't hold it together. So clearly animation alone is not enough. If it were, all of these shows would be as big as Demon Slayer, and they're not. That means Demon Slayer has to have something else going for it beyond just the visuals. And I actually agree with that. I think Demon Slayer does have things going for it outside of animation. The emotional core of the story, specifically the relationship between Tanjiro and Nezuko, is simple, but it works. The idea of a brother doing everything in his power to save his sister is easy to connect to. You don't need to understand Japanese culture or anime conventions to feel something when you watch Tanjiro fight to protect Nezuko. That emotional accessibility is a real strength. The show is also very easy to follow. The plot is straightforward, the goals are clear, and you always know what's at stake. For people who are new to anime, that simplicity is a huge advantage. You can sit down and just enjoy it without needing a wiki open on your phone to understand what's going on. A 2020 survey done by Animate Times, which is one of the biggest anime and manga shops in Japan, asked readers what they found most interesting about Demon Slayer. And 80% of respondents said the characters. Not the animation, the characters. Now that's worth noting. Japanese fans, who were reading the manga before the anime even existed, connected with the characters on their own. That tells us the source material does have something there. It's not nothing. But here's where I have to be honest. And this is the part that I think a lot of fans don't want to hear. Just because the animation isn't the only thing Demon Slayer has going for it, doesn't mean the animation isn't doing the heavy lifting. Both things can be true at the same time. Demon Slayer can have decent characters and an easy-to-follow story, and still be a series where the animation is doing most of the work. And I think the proof of that is sitting right in Ufotable's own history. Because Ufotable didn't just animate Demon Slayer. Before Demon Slayer, they were known for their work on the Fate series, specifically Fate/Zero and Fate/Stay Night, Unlimited Blade Works. And those shows have the same level of gorgeous animation, the same attention to detail in fight scenes, the same cinematic quality in how everything is shot and composed. Unlimited Blade Works in particular looks incredible. The action scenes are beautiful, the visual effects are stunning, and the production quality is every bit as high as what you see in Demon Slayer. But here's the thing, neither of those Fate shows came anywhere close to Demon Slayer's level of mainstream success. They're popular within the anime community, sure, but they didn't become global cultural events. They didn't break box office records. They didn't sell 82 million manga copies in a year. And both of those shows had the same studio, the same animation quality, and the same visual polish. So what was different? The story accessibility. Demon Slayer's plot is simple and universal. A brother trying to save his sister. Anyone can understand that. The Fate series, on the other hand, involves historical figures summoned as magical warriors fighting in elaborate competitions tied to deep lore that stretches across multiple visual novels, games, and spin-offs. It's confusing for newcomers. It's a lot to take in. And that complexity, even paired with elite animation, limited its reach. What this tells us is really revealing. When Ufotable animates a complex story, you get a popular but niche hit within the anime community. When Ufotable animates a simple story, you get a global phenomenon. The animation is the constant in both cases. The variable is the story. And when the story is simpler and easier to access, the animation is what does the selling. The animation is what goes viral. The animation is what makes people who have never watched anime before sit down and watch a show about a boy with a sword and his demon sister. Which means yes, the animation really is doing the heavy lifting. Not all of the lifting, but most of it. And you can see this play out in how Demon Slayer actually gets discussed online. When people recommend the show, what do they say? You have to see the animation. When clips go viral on TikTok, what are they showing? The fight scenes. When someone asks why Demon Slayer is worth watching, what's the first thing out of everyone's mouth? The visuals are insane. Nobody's first recommendation is that you'll be blown away by the depth of the plot. Nobody leads with the complexity of the characters. Nobody says the world building will change how you think about storytelling. They say it looks amazing. And they're right, it does look amazing. But looking amazing and being amazing are two different things. I think the fairest way to put it is this. If Demon Slayer had been animated by a studio that produced average or below average animation, the show would still exist. People would still watch it. Some people would still enjoy it. But it would not be the worldwide record-breaking cultural event that it is today. It would be a decent shonen anime that some people liked and most people moved on from. And if you think I'm being harsh, consider this. The manga was running for 3 full years before the anime came along. And in those 3 years, it never came close to the kind of success it found after Ufotable got involved. The story didn't change. The characters didn't change. The only thing that changed was the animation. And that changed everything. So is Demon Slayer carried by its animation? I think the honest answer is, mostly, yes. That doesn't mean there's nothing else there. The emotional simplicity works. The accessibility works. The brother-sister bond works. But all of those things exist in 100 other anime that never became the biggest franchise on the planet. What separated Demon Slayer from the pack was ufotable, and I think that's a fact that the fanbase needs to sit with, even if it's uncomfortable. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Because once you accept that the animation is doing the heavy lifting, you have to ask yourself a follow-up question. If the visuals are this important, how strong is the actual content underneath? And the first place to test that is with the character who's supposed to anchor the whole thing, the protagonist, Tanjiro Kamado, who might just be one of the most frustratingly bland main characters in modern shonen anime. Section 3. Tanjiro Kamado, the problem with a perfect protagonist. Every great story needs a great main character. That's not a rule that's written down somewhere in a textbook. It's just something you feel when you watch or read anything that really stays with you. Think about the anime that people call the greatest of all time. Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood has Edward Elric, a kid who made a terrible mistake trying to bring his mother back from the dead, and has to live with the consequences of that decision for the entire series. Attack on Titan has Eren Yeager, who starts as a hot-headed kid wanting revenge and slowly transforms into something so different and so morally complicated that the audience doesn't even know if they should be rooting for him anymore. Jujutsu Kaisen has Yuji Itadori, a genuinely good person who is constantly forced into impossible moral situations where there is no right answer, and you watch that weight slowly crush him over time. Naruto has Naruto Uzumaki, a loudmouth kid that nobody believed in, carrying the pain of loneliness and rejection while desperately trying to prove his worth to a village that treated him like garbage. All of these characters have something in common. They're flawed, they make mistakes, they struggle with things inside themselves, not just the enemies in front of them. They change over the course of their stories in ways that feel earned and real. And when you spend hundreds of episodes with a character like that, you feel like you've gone on a journey with them. You feel like you know them. You feel connected to them in a way that goes beyond just watching them fight. And then there's Tanjiro Kamado. Now let me be clear about something before I go any further. Tanjiro is not a bad character. He's not poorly designed. He's not unlikable. In fact, most people who watch Demon Slayer will tell you that Tanjiro is a nice guy, a good person, someone you'd want on your side. And that's all true. The problem with Tanjiro isn't that he's bad. The problem is that he's boring. And in a story that runs for over 200 manga chapters and multiple seasons of anime, boring is a much bigger problem than bad. Because a bad character at least gives you something to react to. A boring character just kind of sits there while you wait for someone more interesting to show up. So what exactly makes Tanjiro boring? Let's break it down. The biggest issue is that Tanjiro has no real flaws. And I don't mean small quirks or minor personality traits that the show plays for laughs. I mean genuine, meaningful character flaws that create internal conflict and force him to grow. Think about what defines Tanjiro as a person. He's kind, he's determined, he's empathetic, he works hard, he cares about his friends, he cares about his sister, he even cares about the demons he kills. He never gives up. He always does the right thing. He always says the right thing. His moral compass never wavers. His beliefs are never seriously challenged. He enters the story as a good person, and he exits the story as pretty much the exact same good person. And look, I get it. Kindness is a nice quality. Determination is admirable. Empathy is something we should all strive for. But when your protagonist is defined entirely by positive traits with nothing to balance them out, what you end up with is not a character. It's a checklist. It's a collection of qualities that sound good on paper, but don't create any tension or drama or interest when you actually watch them play out on screen. Because here's the thing about character flaws. They're not there to make a character worse. They're there to make them more real. When a character has a flaw, it creates a push and pull inside them that the audience can latch onto. Will they overcome their anger? Will they make the selfish choice or the selfless one? Will their past trauma cause them to do something they'll regret? That internal struggle is what makes a protagonist feel alive. It's what makes you lean forward and wonder what they're going to do next. With Tanjiro, you never wonder what he's going to do next, because you already know. He's going to be kind. He's going to try his hardest. He's going to feel bad for the demon. He's going to think about Nezuko. He's going to push through the pain every single time, without exception, from episode 1 to the final chapter. There is no moment in Demon Slayer where Tanjiro seriously considers a morally questionable action. There is no moment where his worldview is genuinely shaken. There is no moment where he does something that makes you go, wait, I didn't expect that from him. Compare that to Eren Yeager from Attack on Titan. In the first season, Eren is a pretty standard hero. He wants to kill the Titans and protect humanity. Simple enough. But as the story goes on, Eren starts to change. His understanding of the world gets more complicated. His methods get more extreme. His morality starts to blur. By the end of the series, the audience is split down the middle on whether Eren is still a hero or whether he's become the very thing he swore to destroy. That transformation is what makes Eren one of the most talked about characters in anime history. Love him or hate him, you cannot ignore him. He forces you to think about what you would do in his position. Tanjiro never forces you to think about anything. He gives you the comfortable answer every time. And comfort is nice in real life. But in storytelling, comfort is the enemy of engagement. Now here's something that I think really proves this point, and it comes from the Demon Slayer fanbase itself. When fans are asked who their favorite character in the show is, Tanjiro almost never comes out on top. Go on any Demon Slayer fan poll. Go on any Reddit thread asking people to rank their favorite characters. Go on any social media discussion about who the best character is. And what you'll find over and over again is that fans consistently prefer the supporting characters over the main character. Rengoku, Giyu, Tengen, Akaza, Kokushibo, Shinobu, Mitsuri, the Hashira in general. These are the characters that fans gravitate toward, make fan art of, cosplay as, and argue about online. Not Tanjiro. And there's a really good reason for that. The Hashira are more interesting because they're more complicated. Each one of them carries some kind of pain or trauma or internal contradiction that makes them feel layered. Rengoku comes from a family where his father gave up on being a swordsman and his mother died young, and yet he chose to burn bright and fight with everything he had anyway. His cheerfulness wasn't naive. It was a choice made in the face of grief. That's interesting. Giyu carries the guilt of surviving when someone he cared about didn't, and that guilt shows up in how distant and cold he is to everyone around him. That's interesting. Shinobu smiles constantly, even though she's consumed by rage over her sister's death. And that disconnect between what she shows on the outside and what she feels on the inside creates a tension that makes her fascinating to watch. That's interesting. Tanjiro is just nice. And when you put him next to any of these characters, the difference in depth is impossible to ignore. He's not bad. He's just flat. And in a cast that's full of characters who have genuine layers to them, the protagonist being the flattest one is a real problem. There's another issue with Tanjiro that gets brought up a lot, and it's about how he handles emotional moments, specifically his crying. Now, there's nothing wrong with a character crying. Emotion is good, vulnerability is good. But Tanjiro cries so often and so intensely that it starts to lose its impact after a while. And more importantly, he sometimes cries in situations where the emotional response feels out of proportion to what's actually happening. The most commonly cited example of this is Rengoku's death in the Mugen Train movie. Now, Rengoku's death is a genuinely sad moment. It's well animated, well scored, and well performed. And for the audience, who has spent the whole movie watching Rengoku be incredible, it hits hard. But here's the thing. Tanjiro knew Rengoku for a matter of hours. They met on the train, they fought together on the train, and Rengoku died on the train. The entire relationship, from introduction to death, takes place over the course of one night. And yet, Tanjiro's reaction to Rengoku's death is one of the most extreme emotional breakdowns in the entire series. He's wailing, he's screaming, he's completely falling apart. And while I understand that Tanjiro is an emotional person by nature, the level of his reaction doesn't feel earned when he's grieving someone he just met. Compare that to how characters in other shows react to losing people they've known for years. People they've trained with and lived with and grown up with. The emotional weight is just different. And when the show treats every loss with the same level of maximum intensity, regardless of the actual depth of the relationship, it starts to feel less like genuine emotion and more like a formula. And that's the word that keeps coming up when you really dig into the criticism of Tanjiro. Formula. He feels like he was assembled from a kit. Kind protagonist? Check. Dead family for motivation? Check. Younger sibling to protect? Check. Special hidden power connected to his bloodline? Check. Never gives up no matter what? Check. Always finds the strength at the last second? Check. Believes in the good in everyone, even his enemies? Check. These are all traits that have appeared in shonen protagonists for decades. Naruto had them, Luffy had them, Goku had them, Deku had them. But what made those characters work, at least at their best, was that they also had something else going on underneath the surface. Naruto had loneliness and a genuine darkness inside him through the 9 tails that he had to constantly battle. Luffy has a moral code that sometimes clashes with the world around him in interesting ways. Deku had to deal with being powerless in a world where power was everything. Those extra dimensions are what elevated those characters above the template. Tanjiro doesn't have that extra dimension. He is the template. And because he is the template and nothing more, he ends up being the least memorable part of his own show. You could swap him out for any other kind-hearted shonen protagonist, and very little about the story would actually change. His personality doesn't shape the events around him in unique ways. He doesn't bring a perspective that only he could bring. He's functional. He moves the plot forward. He does what the story needs him to do. But he doesn't leave a mark. And I think the show kind of knows this on some level. Because as the series goes on, the Hashira start getting more and more screen time, more and more backstory, and more emotional weight in the narrative. And every time one of them steps into the spotlight, the show gets more interesting. Every time we cut back to Tanjiro doing the same things he always does, it gets a little less interesting. The Hashira have something that Tanjiro doesn't. They can die. There's no plot armor protecting them. When Rengoku stepped up to fight Akaza, there was a real chance he wasn't coming back. And he didn't. When the other Hashira go into battle in the later arcs, you feel genuine fear for them, because the show has proven that it's willing to let them go. That raises the stakes. That makes every moment they're on screen matter more. Tanjiro never has that. You always know he's going to survive. You always know he's going to find a way. You always know he's going to be okay. And that safety, combined with his lack of internal conflict and his lack of meaningful growth, creates a protagonist who is perfectly pleasant to watch, but impossible to be truly invested in on a deeper level. Now, some people will say that Tanjiro's simplicity is actually the point, that he's meant to be a steady, grounding presence in a world full of chaos, that his goodness is the message. And I don't entirely disagree with that reading. There is value in a character who represents pure-hearted determination. But value and depth are not the same thing. And when you're asking an audience to spend dozens of hours with a character, you need depth. You need layers. You need surprise. You need something that makes them more than just a vehicle for the plot to move through. Tanjiro doesn't give you that. And for a show that gets talked about as one of the greatest anime ever made, having a protagonist this thin is a serious problem. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But Tanjiro isn't even the biggest character problem in Demon Slayer, because at least he gets to talk. At least he gets to express what he's feeling. At least the audience has access to his thoughts. The same cannot be said for the show's main villain, Muzan Kibutsuji, who after 1,000 years of existence somehow ended up being one of the most shallow and disappointing antagonists in modern shonen anime. Section 4. Muzan Kibutsuji, anime's most underwhelming final boss. Every great hero needs a great villain. This is one of the oldest rules in storytelling, and it exists for a really simple reason. The villain is the thing standing between the hero and their goal. The villain is what creates the conflict. The villain is what raises the stakes and makes you wonder whether the hero is actually going to make it. And when the villain is well written, when they're scary, when they're smart, when they have a motivation that you can at least understand even if you don't agree with it, the entire story gets elevated. The hero's victories feel more earned. The losses feel more painful. The final battle feels like it actually matters. Anime has given us some truly incredible villains over the years. Characters that are so well crafted that fans argue about them and analyze them and rank them for years after their stories end. And one of the things that makes Demon Slayer's position in the overrated conversation so frustrating is that the show's main villain, Muzan Kibutsuji, is not one of those characters. Not even close. In fact, when you really sit down and look at what Muzan actually does across the entire series, what his motivations actually are, and how he compares to the villains in other shonen anime that Demon Slayer gets ranked alongside, you start to realize that Muzan might be one of the weakest main antagonists in the entire genre. And what makes it even worse is that his own subordinates are more interesting than he is. Let's start with his backstory, because this is usually the foundation of what makes a villain compelling. A good backstory doesn't have to make you feel sorry for the villain, but it should make you understand them. It should show you the path they walked to become who they are. It should give them some kind of depth that goes beyond just being evil, because the story needs someone to be evil. Muzan's backstory is revealed during the Swordsmith Village arc, and here it is. Over 1,000 years ago, during the Heian period in Japan, Muzan was a sickly man. He was born with a condition that left him bedridden for most of his life, and he was told by doctors that he would not survive past the age of 20. One doctor developed a special experimental medicine to try and save him. The treatment involved a plant called the blue spider lily. But the medicine didn't show immediate results. Muzan, in a fit of impatience and rage, killed the doctor before the treatment was finished. After killing the doctor, Muzan realized that the medicine had actually been working. It made him incredibly powerful. It made him nearly immortal. But it also turned him into a demon who could not walk in sunlight. And because he killed the doctor before the treatment was complete, he was stuck. Powerful beyond imagination, but forever trapped in the darkness, forever unable to stand in the sun. And that's it. That's Muzan's entire backstory. A sick man got impatient, killed his doctor, became a demon, and has spent the last 1,000 years being angry about it. Now compare that to the backstories of his own upper moon demons. These are the characters who serve under Muzan, the ones ranked below him in the demon hierarchy. And yet their stories are richer, more tragic, and more emotionally resonant than anything Muzan's character ever offers. Take Akaza, Upper Moon 3. Before he became a demon, Akaza was a human man named Hakuji. He grew up in extreme poverty, constantly stealing to pay for medicine for his sick father. His father, unable to bear the burden of his son becoming a criminal on his behalf, killed himself. Hakuji was left with nothing. Eventually, he found some happiness. He met a martial arts master who took him in and trained him. He fell in love with the master's daughter, Koyuki. For the first time in his life, he had something worth living for. And then, a rival dojo poisoned the well that Koyuki and her father drank from, killing them both while Hakuji was away. When he returned and found them dead, the grief and rage consumed him so completely that he killed everyone in the rival dojo with his bare hands. Muzan found him in the aftermath and turned him into a demon against his will. That is a villain backstory. That is a character who you can feel something for, even though he's done terrible things. His pain is real. His loss is real. The path that led him to becoming a monster is tragic and understandable and human. And when Akaza finally remembers his human life during his fight with Tanjiro and Giyu in the Infinity Castle, and he chooses to destroy himself rather than continue living as the thing Muzan turned him into, it's one of the most emotionally powerful moments in the entire series. Or take Daki and Gyutaro, the Upper Moon 6 pair from the Entertainment District arc. Before becoming demons, they were human siblings living in the lowest, most miserable part of society. Gyutaro was born ugly and was mocked and abused by everyone around him. His sister, who would become Daki, was born beautiful, which in the world they lived in made her a target in different but equally cruel ways. They had nothing. Nobody helped them. Nobody cared about them. And when Daki was burned alive as punishment for stabbing a client, and Gyutaro found her dying body in the snow, he clung to her and begged for someone, anyone, to save them. Muzan's subordinate found them and turned them both into demons. Their transformation wasn't born from a desire for power. It was born from desperation and abandonment, and the complete failure of the world to show them even basic human kindness. These are villains you remember. These are characters whose deaths hit you in the gut because the show took the time to make you understand who they were before they became monsters. And every single one of them is more compelling than the main villain they all serve under. Because Muzan doesn't have that kind of depth. His motivation, from the moment he becomes a demon until the very end of the series, is the same single thing. He wants to conquer the sun. He wants to become truly immortal by removing his one weakness, which is sunlight. That's his entire goal for 1,000 years. Not a philosophy, not an ideology, not a vision for what the world should look like, not even a grudge against a specific person or group. He just wants to not die. And while survival is a motivation that makes logical sense, it's also the most basic and shallow motivation you can give a villain. It tells us nothing about who Muzan is as a person beyond the fact that he's afraid of death. And after 1,000 years of life, you'd think he might have developed a slightly more interesting perspective on things. Now let's talk about what Muzan actually does throughout the series, because his actions as a villain are just as disappointing as his backstory. One of the most commonly criticized decisions Muzan makes happens after the events of the Mount Natagumo arc in Season 1. During that arc, Tanjiro and his friends face Lower Moon 5, a demon named Rui. Rui is defeated, though not without giving the Demon Slayers a serious fight and badly wounding Tanjiro in the process. After Rui's death, Muzan calls a meeting of the remaining Lower Moon demons. And what does he do at this meeting? He kills almost all of them. He slaughters his own soldiers because he's disappointed that one of them lost. The only Lower Moon he spares is Enmu, and that's only because Enmu's reaction to being about to die amused him. Think about this for a second. The Demon Slayer Corps, the organization trying to destroy Muzan, has been struggling to defeat even Lower Moon level demons. These are powerful fighters who have killed countless demon slayers. They are valuable military assets, and Muzan just wiped them out because his pride was hurt. He eliminated his own army out of pettiness. From a strategic standpoint, this might be one of the dumbest decisions any villain has ever made in shonen anime. It would be like a general losing one soldier in a battle and responding by executing the rest of his troops. It accomplishes nothing except making his own side weaker. Fans often defend this by saying it shows how terrifying and unpredictable Muzan is. And sure, in the moment, it is a scary scene. Watching the lower moons tremble and die one by one, while Muzan casually dismisses them, is unsettling. But scary in the moment and smart in the long run are two different things. And a villain who consistently makes decisions that hurt his own cause is not a villain you can take seriously as a strategic threat. He's a bully throwing a tantrum. And that's not intimidating. That's just frustrating to watch. And then there's Muzan's actual fighting ability, which, for the progenitor of all demons, for the 1,000-year-old original demon, for the so-called Demon King, is shockingly unimpressive in terms of creativity. Every Upper Moon demon in the series developed their own unique blood demon art. These are special powers that are specific to each demon and reflect their personality and history. Akaza developed a martial arts-based fighting style called Destructive Death that combined his human combat skills with his demon power. Daki could create sentient sashes from her body. Gyutaro wielded poison blood sickles. Kokushibo, Upper Moon 1, created an entire sword fighting style that generated crescent moon-shaped blades from every swing. Hantengu could split himself into multiple emotional clones, each with different elemental powers. These abilities are creative, visually distinct, and make each fight feel different from the last. Muzan, who has been alive longer than every single one of them, developed nothing. His fighting style in the final battle amounts to brute force. He's faster than everyone else. He's stronger than everyone else. He can shapeshift his body into whips and tendrils. But there's no named technique. There's no blood demon art that reflects 1,000 years of experience or growth. He just hits really hard and is really difficult to kill. For the final boss of the entire series, for the villain that the entire story has been building toward, that is genuinely underwhelming. Where the Upper Moon spent centuries perfecting their unique abilities, Muzan apparently spent a millennium doing nothing interesting with his power. And all of this combines to create a villain who fails the most basic test of a great antagonist. A great villain should make you feel like the hero might actually lose. A great villain should make the final confrontation feel like the most important and most dangerous moment in the story. A great villain should feel like a worthy opponent for everything the hero has gone through to get to that point. Muzan doesn't pass that test. And the reason he doesn't is because his own subordinates already set the bar higher than he can reach. After watching Akaza's devastating fight with Rengoku, after seeing the emotional destruction of the Daki and Gyutaro battle, after witnessing Kokushibo's terrifying power as Upper Moon 1, you walk into the Muzan fight expecting the ultimate challenge, the ultimate villain, the ultimate emotional payoff. And instead, you get a guy with a shallow backstory, one single motivation, no unique fighting style, and a track record of making terrible strategic decisions. The Upper Moons are the best villains in Demon Slayer. Muzan is the worst. And the fact that the worst villain in the show is the main one is a storytelling failure that no amount of beautiful animation can fix. Now, fans and critics regularly compare Muzan to the great shonen villains, and the difference is painful. Madara Uchiha from Naruto had a philosophy about peace and war that you could genuinely debate. Aizen from Bleach was so intelligent and so many steps ahead of everyone that every twist he pulled off felt like a genuine shock. Sukuna from Jujutsu Kaisen is pure chaotic menace, who radiates danger every second he's on screen. Muzan radiates nothing. He's a coward who hides behind his demons, makes impulsive decisions that weaken his own forces, and whose grand ambition after 1,000 years of life is simply to keep living. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And if having a weak protagonist and a weak villain wasn't enough, Demon Slayer manages to do something even more frustrating with its most important female character. Something that goes beyond just bad writing, and into territory that raises genuinely uncomfortable questions about how the show treats its women. Section 5. Nezuko, the silencing of Demon Slayer's most important character. If you had to pick the single most recognizable character in all of Demon Slayer, it probably wouldn't be Tanjiro. It wouldn't be Rengoku or Giyu or any of the Hashira. It would be Nezuko Kamato. The girl with the pink kimono, the bamboo muzzle, and the wooden box on her brother's back. Nezuko is everywhere. She's on t-shirts, on keychains, on phone cases, on backpacks, on posters in anime shops around the world. She is the face of the Demon Slayer franchise, the mascot, the icon, the character that most people think of first when they hear the name Demon Slayer. And she is also, without question, the most wasted character in the entire series. Because here is the uncomfortable truth about Nezuko Kamado. She is the most important character in the story. The entire plot revolves around her. Tanjiro's motivation, his reason for becoming a demon slayer, his reason for fighting, his reason for pushing through every impossible battle, is Nezuko. Saving her, protecting her, finding a cure that will turn her back into a human. Everything Tanjiro does, he does for her. She is the emotional heart of the entire show. And despite being that important, despite being the reason the story even exists, Nezuko is barely treated as a character at all. She's treated as an object, a plot device, a thing to be carried around and protected and occasionally unleashed when the show needs her powers. But never as a person with her own thoughts, her own feelings, her own voice, and her own choices. Let's start with the most obvious and most discussed issue. Nezuko cannot speak for almost the entire series. In the very first episode, after Muzan attacks the Kamado family and turns Nezuko into a demon, she tries to attack Tanjiro in her newly transformed state. The water Hashira, Giyu Tomioka, arrives and is about to kill her, but Tanjiro begs him to stop. After Nezuko shows a flicker of her humanity by protecting Tanjiro instead of attacking him, Giyu spares her life and sends both siblings to his former master, Sakonji Urokodaki. Urokodaki gives Nezuko a bamboo muzzle to wear over her mouth. The purpose of the muzzle is to prevent her from biting humans, since as a demon she could potentially lose control and attack someone. And from that moment on, Nezuko is silent. For seasons upon seasons of anime, for the vast majority of the manga, the bamboo muzzle stays on her face and she does not speak. She communicates through muffled sounds, little grunts, small noises that don't form words. Occasionally she'll make a concerned humming sound or an angry growl, but she does not talk. She does not express herself with language. She does not tell anyone what she wants, what she's feeling, what she's afraid of, or what she's thinking. The muzzle takes all of that away from her. Now, the show gives a reason for this. The muzzle is a safety measure. It's there to make sure she doesn't bite anyone. And on a basic story logic level, that makes sense. If you have a demon traveling alongside humans, you'd want some kind of safeguard. But here's where the problem starts. Because the muzzle isn't just a physical restraint, it becomes a narrative one. By keeping Nezuko silent, the show removes her ability to participate in her own story in any meaningful way. She can't argue, she can't agree, she can't ask questions, she can't share her perspective, she can't tell Tanjiro what she's experiencing as a demon from the inside. She can't form relationships with other characters through conversation. She is cut off from the most basic form of human connection, which is communication. And the show never seems to think that's a problem worth addressing. And it's not like the show had to do this. Because here's something that a lot of fans don't think about. Every other demon in Demon Slayer can talk. Every single one. The upper moons all speak fluently and express complex thoughts and emotions through dialogue. Akaza talks about his philosophy of strength. Daki argues with her brother. Kokushibo reflects on his jealousy toward his twin. Doma delivers chilling monologues about his complete lack of empathy. Even the lower moon demons can speak. Even random unnamed demons that Tanjiro encounters on his missions can speak. Tamayo, a demon who is an ally to the Demon Slayers, speaks eloquently and has deep conversations with Tanjiro about the nature of demons and the possibility of a cure. Her companion Yushiro, also a demon, talks constantly. The ability to speak is not something that demons lose when they transform. It is standard for every demon in the series. Every demon except Nezuko. The show's explanation for this is that Nezuko's transformation somehow caused her to regress mentally. She lost much of her memory and many of her cognitive abilities, reducing her to a childlike mental state. And this is presented as just a thing that happened, something the audience is supposed to accept. But it doesn't line up with how any other demon transformation works in the series. No other demon loses their ability to speak when they're turned. No other demon regresses to the mental state of a toddler. Rui was turned into a demon as a young child, and he could still speak and think and form complex plans. The whole thing feels like a choice the creator made not because it was consistent with the world's rules, but because it served a specific narrative purpose. That purpose being to keep Nezuko quiet so that Tanjiro could be the one to speak for both of them. And that leads to the second major issue. Because Nezuko can't speak, Tanjiro becomes her interpreter. He tells other characters what she's feeling. He explains her motivations. He describes her emotions. He decides what's best for her. And the audience has to take his word for it, because they have no direct access to Nezuko's inner world. In anime, characters are often given inner monologues where the audience can hear their thoughts. Tanjiro has them constantly. The Hashira have them. The demons have them. Even characters who appear for just a few episodes get inner monologues that let the audience understand what they're going through. Nezuko barely gets any. The few times we hear anything from inside her head, it's usually connected to the hypnotic suggestion that Urokodaki planted in her mind while she was unconscious. During her 2 years of sleep before the series properly begins, Urokodaki repeatedly told the unconscious Nezuko that all humans are her family and that she must protect them. So even the rare moments where we access Nezuko's thoughts aren't really her thoughts. They're ideas that were put into her head by someone else while she was sleeping and couldn't consent to it. Think about that for a second. The show's main female character can't speak, can't express her own desires, has her thoughts shaped by hypnosis she didn't agree to, and has her feelings interpreted and explained by her brother. She exists in a state where every other character around her has more control over her narrative than she does. And the show presents this as normal, as fine, as just the way things are. But before we move on, I want to be really fair about something. There are moments where Nezuko gets to shine, and they should be acknowledged. During the Entertainment District arc, when Daki pushes her to the limit, Nezuko enters her awakened form and fights with a level of ferocity and power that genuinely took the audience by surprise. She was kicking through buildings. She was regenerating from wounds that would have killed most demons. She was going head-to-head with an upper moon demon and holding her own. It was thrilling to watch. It showed what Nezuko was capable of when the story actually let her off the leash. But even that moment ended up reinforcing the problem. Because after she entered her awakened form and the muzzle broke off, she lost control. She nearly attacked a human civilian. And it was Tanjiro who had to step in and physically restrain her, holding her down and singing a lullaby until she calmed down and shrank back to her smaller, more passive form. The one time Nezuko truly broke free and acted on her own, she was immediately shown to be dangerous and out of control, and she needed her brother to bring her back. The message, whether the show intended it or not, is clear. When Nezuko acts independently, bad things happen. When she's contained and controlled, everything is fine. And then there's the issue that a lot of fans find the most uncomfortable. As the series goes on, Nezuko's body is increasingly shown in a way that feels designed to appeal to a certain kind of audience. When she enters her awakened form during the Entertainment District arc, her body transforms. She becomes taller, more curved, and her appearance shifts to look significantly more adult. Her clothes barely contain her changed body, and the camera does not shy away from this. It lingers. It frames her body in ways that are clearly meant to be noticed. And here's why this matters. Nezuko is 14 years old. She is a child who cannot speak, cannot make choices about how she presents herself, and is not aware enough in her demon state to consent to anything. Other characters in the show who are adults and who choose to present themselves in certain ways, like Mitsuri Kanroji, who is 19 and makes deliberate choices about her appearance. That's a different conversation. You can debate that, but at least there's agency involved. Mitsuri is an adult making a choice. Nezuko is a child who has no choice, no voice, and no awareness. And the show still chooses to present her body as something for the audience to look at. That's a problem. And it's a problem that goes beyond just Demon Slayer and into how the anime industry in general handles its female characters, especially young ones. But even setting that aside entirely, even if you remove the visual presentation issue from the conversation, Nezuko's character is still fundamentally underwritten. She has no goals of her own. The entire series is about Tanjiro trying to turn her back into a human. But does Nezuko want that? We don't know. We literally don't know because she can't tell us, and the show never gives us access to her inner thoughts on the matter. Tanjiro decided that turning Nezuko back is the mission. Tanjiro made that choice, and Nezuko just exists inside that choice without ever confirming or denying it. She doesn't form meaningful relationships with anyone other than Tanjiro. She doesn't have conversations with the other characters. She doesn't grow or change in the way that a main character should over the course of a long story. She goes from being a silent passenger in a box to being a silent weapon that gets deployed when the plot needs her, and then goes back in the box. The academic world has even taken notice of this. Ronald S. Green, who is the chair of philosophy and religious studies at Coastal Carolina University, wrote about Nezuko's character and noted that her bamboo muzzle could be seen as a symbol of historical cultural norms around silencing women. he connected her depiction to a broader tradition in Japanese literature, where female characters are constrained and defined by the men around them. Whether or not the creator intended this symbolism, the result is the same. Nezuko is a character who is silenced, contained, carried, controlled, and spoken for by the men in her story. And in a show that gets praised for its emotional depth and its ability to make audiences feel things, the fact that its most important female character is treated this way is a contradiction that deserves more attention than it gets. If Nezuko had been given a voice, if she had been allowed to speak, even imperfectly, even in broken sentences as she fought against her demon nature, if the audience had been given access to her thoughts and fears and desires, if she had been treated as a person instead of a symbol, Demon Slayer would be a stronger show. Tanjiro's mission would carry more weight because we'd be fighting for someone we actually know, not just someone we're told to care about. And the emotional payoff of her story would land harder because we'd have been on the journey with her, not just watching her brother go on it while she sleeps in a box. But Demon Slayer didn't make those choices. And the fact that it didn't, the fact that it chose to silence its most important female character and treat her more like a mascot than a person, says something about the show's priorities. It prioritized visual spectacle over character depth. It prioritized simplicity over complexity. And it prioritized the brother's story over the sister's story, even though the sister's story is arguably the more interesting one. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And that pattern of choosing the simple path over the deeper one doesn't stop with Nezuko. It runs through the entire story of Demon Slayer from beginning to end, and it shows up most clearly when you look at the actual plot the show is built on. A plot that follows the shonen formula so closely and so faithfully that you can predict what's going to happen before it happens. Section 6. The story problem. How generic is too generic? So far we've talked about how the animation is doing most of the heavy lifting, how the protagonist is bland, how the main villain is shallow, and how the most important female character is silenced for the majority of the story. But all of those issues exist within something bigger. They exist within the actual plot of Demon Slayer, the story itself, the bones that hold the whole thing together. And when you strip away the gorgeous animation, when you take away the stunning fight scenes and the beautiful colors and the breathtaking visual effects, and you just look at the story on its own, what you find is one of the most straightforward, predictable, and by-the-book shonen narratives in modern anime. And I want to be clear, being straightforward is not automatically a bad thing. Some of the most beloved stories in the world are simple. There's a reason fairy tales have lasted for centuries. There's a reason people still love stories about good versus evil. Simplicity can be a strength when it's done with purpose, when the simplicity allows for deeper emotional resonance or creates space for the characters to breathe and grow in interesting ways. But there's a difference between being simple with purpose and being simple because you're just following a template. And Demon Slayer, when you really examine its story beat by beat, falls into the second category far more often than the first. Let's just walk through the basic plot. A young boy lives peacefully with his family. A great evil destroys that family. The boy discovers he has a special connection to a powerful ability. He trains under a wise mentor. He joins an organization of warriors. He fights increasingly powerful enemies in a clear ranking system. He makes friends along the way who fight alongside him. He unlocks new powers at critical moments, often just in time to survive. He eventually confronts the source of the great evil. He defeats it. The end. If that sounds familiar, it should, because that is not just the plot of Demon Slayer. That is the plot of Naruto, and Dragon Ball Z, and Bleach, and My Hero Academia, and Black Clover, and about 50 other shonen anime that have come and gone over the last 30 years. The hero's journey through the shonen filter. It's a template that has been used so many times that it has basically become the default setting for this type of anime. And Demon Slayer follows it step by step without ever once trying to do something unexpected with it. Now, the shows I just listed all use some version of this template too. I'm not pretending that Naruto or Dragon Ball invented some wildly original type of storytelling. They didn't. But what the best of those shows did, the ones that people still talk about years and even decades later, was take that familiar template and add something on top of it. Something that made the audience see the formula from a new angle. Something that elevated the story beyond just going through the motions. Naruto took the basic shonen formula and layered a deeply political world on top of it. The hidden villages aren't just locations where fighters train. They're nations with histories, with generational trauma, with cycles of violence and revenge that stretch back hundreds of years. The villains in Naruto aren't just bad guys who want power. Many of them are products of a broken system. Pain wants to end war by making everyone experience suffering. Itachi sacrificed everything to prevent a civil war that nobody even knew was coming. The story constantly asks the question of whether the system the heroes are fighting to protect is even worth protecting. That's a layer of depth that goes beyond the formula. Attack on Titan is an even more extreme example. It starts as a straightforward survival story. Humanity lives behind walls. Titans eat people. The hero wants to kill all the Titans. Simple enough. But then the story starts peeling back layers. The Titans aren't what you thought they were. The world outside the walls isn't what you thought it was. The enemy isn't who you thought they were. And eventually the hero himself isn't who you thought he was. Attack on Titan takes the shonen formula and flips it upside down and inside out until the audience doesn't even know what kind of story they're watching anymore. It challenges your assumptions about good and evil, about freedom and oppression, about what you would do if you had the power to change the world, but the cost was unspeakable. Whether you love the ending or hate it, you cannot deny that Attack on Titan tried to do something genuinely different with the genre. Demon Slayer never tries to do anything different. Not once across the entire series. And that's not me being unfair or overlooking something. It's just the reality of how the story is structured. Let me walk you through how a typical Demon Slayer arc works, because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. Tanjiro and his friends arrive at a new location. They discover that a demon is terrorizing people in that area. They confront the demon. The demon is powerful and pushes them to their limits. During the fight, there's a flashback to the demon's human life, showing that they were once a normal person who suffered some kind of tragedy before being turned into a demon by Muzan. Tanjiro fights with everything he has. At a critical moment, he unlocks a new level of his abilities, or remembers something his father or Urokodaki taught him. He defeats the demon. As the demon dies, there's a final emotional moment where Tanjiro acknowledges the humanity the demon once had. He feels compassion for them. The audience is supposed to feel sad. And then we move on to the next arc, where the exact same thing happens again with a slightly stronger demon. Mount Natagumo arc, Mugen Train arc, Entertainment District arc, Swordsmith Village arc. The pattern repeats. The demons get stronger. Tanjiro gets stronger to match. The flashbacks get more elaborate. But the structure never changes. You always know what's coming. You always know there will be a tragic backstory. You always know Tanjiro will feel bad for the demon. You always know he'll find the power he needs at the last second. And you always know he'll survive. Now, the first time this pattern plays out, it works. It works really well, actually. The first time you see a demon die, and then the show cuts to this heartbreaking flashback of who they used to be, it's genuinely moving. It makes you think about the fact that these monsters were once people, and that's a powerful idea. The problem is that Demon Slayer uses this same emotional trick every single time. And like any trick, the more you see it, the less it affects you. By the third or fourth time you're watching a demon dissolve while sad music plays and a tragic backstory unfolds, you're not feeling the same gut punch you felt the first time. You're just watching the pattern complete itself again. You can see it coming from a mile away, and predictability is the enemy of emotional impact. Compare this to how Jujutsu Kaisen handles its villains. In Jujutsu Kaisen, the antagonists are not all treated the same way. Some of them get sympathetic backstories, some of them don't. Some of them die with emotional weight, and some of them just get obliterated with no ceremony at all. The show does not follow a single formula for how it deals with its villains, which means the audience never knows what to expect. When a villain goes down in Jujutsu Kaisen, you don't know if it's going to be tragic or triumphant, or horrifying, or darkly funny. That unpredictability keeps you on edge. It keeps you engaged. It makes every encounter feel like it could go anywhere. Demon Slayer doesn't have that. Every encounter goes to the same place, and after a while, going to the same place stops feeling meaningful and starts feeling mechanical. Then there's the world building, or more accurately, the lack of it. The world of Demon Slayer is set during the Taisho period of Japan, which ran from 1912 to 1926. And the show uses this setting mostly as a backdrop. It looks nice. The architecture, the clothing, the landscapes, they all contribute to the visual beauty of the series. But the setting is never really explored in a meaningful way. How does the existence of demons affect society on a larger scale? How does the Demon Slayer Corps function as an organization within the political structure of Taisho-era Japan? What do regular people know about demons? How does the government interact with the Corps? What are the economic or social consequences of demon attacks on communities? The show doesn't ask any of these questions, let alone answer them. The Demon Slayer core exists. Muzan exists. Demons exist. And these three elements float in a world that never develops any deeper texture around them. There's no politics. There's no social commentary. There's no examination of how power structures work or fail. The core has a leader, Kagaya Ubuyashiki, who is sick and commands from the shadows. The Hashira report to him. Demon Slayers go on missions. That's it. The whole system is presented in the simplest possible terms and never questioned or explored further. Again, compare this to the other shows that Demon Slayer gets ranked alongside. The world of Naruto has a complex political system, with villages that form alliances and fight wars and deal with internal corruption. The world of One Piece has a global government, a navy, revolutionary forces, and an entire social structure built around the concept of freedom. The world of Attack on Titan has nations, ethnic conflicts, historical propaganda, and military factions with competing ideologies. Even My Hero Academia, which is not usually praised as the deepest shonen, still has a society that explores what happens when superpowers become normal, and how that affects everything from law enforcement to class structure to personal identity. Demon Slayer's world has none of that. It has a good guys organization, a bad guys organization, and a pretty countryside connecting the two. Everything else is just scenery. And when a show's world building is that thin, it means the story can only ever operate on one level. Fight the next demon, get stronger. Fight the next demon, get stronger. There's no room for the story to explore ideas or ask questions or challenge the audience to think about something beyond the next battle. And that's a limitation that the best anime in the genre simply don't have. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But if you want to understand why the world building is thin, why certain characters feel underdeveloped, and why the story sometimes feels like it's sprinting past things that deserve more time, there's actually a really concrete explanation, and it has to do with what happened behind the scenes. Because the Demon Slayer manga didn't end naturally. It didn't wrap up at a comfortable pace with everything neatly tied together. It was rushed to a finish, and the reasons behind that rush explain a lot of the problems that fans have been pointing out for years. Section 7. The rushed ending. 205 chapters weren't enough. Everything we've talked about so far, the flat protagonist, the shallow villain, the silenced female lead, the repetitive story structure, the thin world building, all of these problems would be easier to forgive if the story had at least stuck the landing. If Demon Slayer had built to a climax that felt earned, wrapped up its character arcs with care, and given its audience a conclusion that honored the journey they'd been on, a lot of the criticisms we've discussed would feel less important. A great ending can redeem a lot of flaws. It can make you look back at the whole story with more generosity. It can turn a good show into a great one. Demon Slayer did not get that ending. The Demon Slayer manga, written and illustrated by Koyoharu Gotoge, began serialization in Weekly Shonen Jump in February of 2016. It ran for 4 years and wrapped up in May of 2020 with chapter 205. In total, the series produced 23 collected volumes. And on one hand, there's something admirable about that. In an industry where some manga run for decades and hundreds of chapters, often stretching their stories way past the point where they should have ended, Demon Slayer told a complete story in a relatively tight package. It had a beginning, a middle, and an end. It didn't overstay its welcome in the way that something like Bleach did in its final years, or the way that Naruto's war arc dragged on far longer than it needed to. But there's a difference between a story that ends at the right time and a story that ends too soon. And Demon Slayer, by almost every measure, ended too soon. Not by a little, by a lot. And the consequences of that rushed ending are felt in every corner of the story's final stretch. To understand just how compressed Demon Slayer is compared to its peers, you have to look at the numbers. Naruto ran for 700 chapters across 72 volumes. Bleach ran for 686 chapters across 74 volumes. One Piece has been running since 1997 and has over 1,100 chapters across more than 100 volumes, and it's still going. Even My Hero Academia, which is considered a shorter modern shonen, ran for 430 chapters across 42 volumes. Demon Slayer told its entire story in 205 chapters across 23 volumes. That's less than a third of what Naruto had. Less than a third of what Bleach had. About half of what My Hero Academia had. Now, fewer chapters doesn't automatically mean worse. You can tell a great story in a short amount of space. But when your story includes a protagonist on a quest to save his sister, an entire organization of elite demon slayers called the Hashira, with 9 members, who all have their own backstories and motivations and fighting styles. A hierarchy of 12 ranked villain demons, each with their own abilities and tragic pasts. A 1,000-year-old main villain, a complex power system involving multiple breathing styles, and a final battle that's supposed to be the climax of everything the series has been. Building toward 205 chapters is simply not enough room. Something has to give. Something has to be cut short. And in Demon Slayer's case, a lot of things were cut short. The problems start becoming really noticeable during the Infinity Castle arc, which is the final major arc of the manga. This is the arc where everything comes to a head. The Demon Slayer Corps launches their final assault against Muzan and his remaining Upper Moon demons inside the Infinity Castle, a massive shape-shifting fortress controlled by Upper Moon 4, a demon named Nakime. Multiple battles happen simultaneously. Hashira are paired off against Upper Moon demons. Tanjiro and his friends are fighting for their lives. Characters are dying. New powers are being unlocked. Backstories are being revealed. It's supposed to be the most important, most intense, most emotionally heavy section of the entire story. And it races by at a speed that doesn't let any of it land the way it should. Take the Hashira, for example. These are the 9 most elite demon slayers in the entire Corps. They are fan-favorite characters. People love them. People cosplay as them. People argue about which one is the strongest. And yet, because of how compressed the final arc is, most of them never get the development they deserve. Some of them get a handful of chapters at best before they're thrown into life-or-death battles. Their backstories, which should be emotional high points that make the audience understand who these characters are and why they fight, are sometimes crammed into just a few pages in the middle of a battle. Riichiro Tokito, the Mist Hashira, is a perfect example. He's introduced relatively late in the series during the Swordsmith Village arc. Fans get a brief look at his past and his connection to his twin brother, and then he's almost immediately thrown into the Infinity Castle battles. His entire character arc, from mysterious and detached warrior to someone who rediscovers his purpose and his humanity, plays out in a handful of chapters, and then he dies. For a character that fans came to care about, it feels like his story barely had time to begin before it was over. The emotional impact of his death, which should have been devastating, is dulled because the audience simply didn't have enough time with him to feel the full weight of the loss. The same issue affects multiple Hashira, Obanai Iguro and Mitsuri Kanroji. The Serpent Hashira and the Love Hashira have a relationship that is revealed primarily in the final battle. Their feelings for each other, their shared moments, their connection, all of it comes pouring out in the last stretch of the story. And while the moments themselves are genuinely touching, they would have hit so much harder if the manga had taken the time to develop their relationship earlier. Instead, the audience is told to care about a love story that they've barely seen unfold. It's emotional shorthand. The feelings are stated rather than built. Gyomei Himejima, the Stone Hashira and the strongest member of the Corps, gets a backstory that's powerful but brief. Sanemi Shinazugawa, the Wind Hashira, has a deeply painful history with his mother and brother that the manga touches on, but never fully explores until the very end. These are all characters who deserved more pages, more chapters, more room to breathe. And they didn't get it because the manga was barreling toward its conclusion at a pace that didn't leave room for that kind of development. And then there are characters who were denied backstories altogether. Nakime, Upper Moon 4, the demon who controls the Infinity Castle itself, never received a backstory in the manga at all. Her past was eventually revealed in the Demon Slayer Corps Records fanbook, a supplementary book that came out after the manga ended. Think about that. A character who plays a key role in the final arc, whose powers literally shape the battlefield of the climactic battle, and the audience never learns who she was or how she became a demon within the actual story. Her backstory had to be published separately because the manga simply didn't have the space to include it. The pacing problems extend to the fights themselves. During the Infinity Castle arc, major battles between Hashira and Upper Moon demons happen back to back to back with barely any pause between them. The manga jumps from one fight to another, cutting away just as the tension is building and then cutting back just in time for the resolution. In a longer manga, each of these battles would have been given room to develop. The buildup would be longer. The emotional stakes would be established more carefully. The aftermath would be given space to land. In Demon Slayer, the battles often feel like they're happening on fast forward. Fans even noticed specific signs that the pacing was being rushed during the Kokushibo fight. Kokushibo is Upper Moon 1, the second most powerful demon after Muzan, and a character whose backstory is one of the most fascinating in the series. He was once a human named Michikatsu Tsugikuni, the twin brother of Yoriichi Tsugikuni, the legendary swordsman who created sun breathing and was the only human to ever nearly kill Muzan. The dynamic between the twin brothers, one who became the greatest demon slayer who ever lived, and one who became the strongest demon out of jealousy and resentment, is genuinely compelling. But the fight against Kokushibo, while still one of the better moments in the final arc, shows signs of being compressed. Some fans pointed out that certain panels appeared to be reused within the fight, which is often a sign that the manga was being produced under tight time pressure. And then there's the ending itself. After the defeat of Muzan in the Sunrise Countdown arc, the manga jumps forward in time. The final chapter, chapter 205, shows the modern-day descendants and reincarnations of the characters living in present-day Japan. It's meant to be a hopeful, feel-good conclusion that shows the legacy of the Demon Slayers living on through future generations. And on paper, it's a sweet idea. But the execution is jarring. The jump from the final battle to the modern day is abrupt. There's no extended aftermath. There's no chapter where the surviving characters sit with their grief, process what they've been through, or say goodbye to the friends they lost. The audience goes from the most intense and deadly battle in the entire series to a lighthearted modern-day epilogue with almost no transition. For a story that spent so much time building emotional connections between its characters, skipping the aftermath of the most emotional event in the series feels like a betrayal of those connections. The audience needed time to grieve with the characters. They needed a chapter of Tanjiro reflecting on everything he lost and everything he gained. They needed to see the surviving Hashira deal with the weight of what happened. Instead, the manga just ends. Fast forward, here are the great-grandkids. Thanks for reading. It was widely reported and later confirmed that Gotoge rushed the ending due to personal and family issues. Reports indicated that Gotoge had to leave Tokyo because of a situation involving her parents and was no longer able to continue working as a manga artist at the time. This context is important because it means the rushed ending wasn't necessarily a creative choice. It may have been a necessity forced by real-life circumstances. And I have nothing but sympathy for Gotoge in that situation. Being a manga artist is incredibly demanding work, with brutal weekly deadlines and enormous physical and mental pressure. If she needed to step away for personal reasons, that's completely understandable, and she should never be criticized for putting her well-being first. But understanding why the ending was rushed doesn't change the fact that it was rushed, and the consequences of that rush are real and permanent. Characters were underdeveloped, backstories were skipped, relationships were stated instead of shown. The final battle didn't get the space it needed, and the epilogue arrived before the audience was ready for it. These are all real flaws in the final product, regardless of the reasons behind them. And they matter because this is the ending that the Infinity Castle movie trilogy is adapting. These are the chapters that Ufotable is going to animate. And while Ufotable has already shown a willingness to expand on the manga material and add additional scenes and content, the foundation they're building on is a rushed one. Whether the movies can fix what the manga didn't have time to finish remains to be seen. Now, some people argue that the rushed ending is actually fine. They say that Demon Slayer was always meant to be a shorter story, and that not every manga needs to run for 500 chapters. And that's fair. But the issue isn't the length. The issue is the proportion. When your final arc contains more major character deaths, more major battles, and more emotional revelations than any other part of your story, and it's also the part that moves the fastest, something is out of balance. The most important part of the story got the least amount of room to breathe, and no amount of defending the overall length changes that. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But before we move on from character issues entirely, there's one more character we need to talk about. Because if Tanjiro is the most bland, Muzan is the most shallow, and Nezuko is the most silenced, then Zenitsu Agatsuma might just be the most divisive character in modern shonen anime. A character so annoying to some viewers that he's literally made people stop watching the show altogether. Section 8. The Zenitsu Problem. When comic relief becomes unwatchable. Every long-running anime has at least one character that the fan base argues about. One character that some people absolutely love and other people cannot stand. One character that splits the audience right down the middle every time their name comes up in a conversation. In Demon Slayer, that character is Zenitsu Agatsuma. And he doesn't just split the fanbase a little, he splits it violently. Because the gap between how Zenitsu is received by the people who love him and the people who hate him is one of the widest character reception gaps in modern anime. On one side, you have fans, particularly in Japan, who find Zenitsu hilarious, relatable, and ultimately one of the most rewarding characters in the entire series. On the other side, you have fans, particularly in the West, who find him so unbearably annoying that they have literally stopped watching the show because of him. Not because of a boring arc, not because of a plot twist they didn't like, because of one character being so grating that they could not sit through another minute of him screaming. And when a single character is driving viewers away from your show, that's not just a matter of personal taste. That's a writing problem. And it's a writing problem that Demon Slayer created for itself by leaning so hard into a type of comedic character that clashes directly with the emotional tone the show is trying to build everywhere else. Let's start with how Zenitsu is introduced, because first impressions matter in storytelling, and Zenitsu's first impression is one of the worst in recent anime history. When we first meet Zenitsu during the aftermath of the final selection, the brutal entrance exam for the Demon Slayer Corps, he is on the ground begging a random girl he just met to marry him. That's the first thing he does. Not fighting a demon, not showing off a skill, not demonstrating some piece of his personality that makes you curious to learn more about him. He's grabbing a stranger and pleading with her to be his wife. It's meant to be funny. For a lot of viewers, especially in the West, it's just deeply uncomfortable. And from that point on, for the majority of the first season and well into the arcs that follow, Zenitsu operates in roughly the same mode. He screams, he cries, he panics, he whines. He grabs onto Tanjiro and begs not to be sent into dangerous situations. He proclaims his love for Nezuko at full volume every chance he gets. He complains constantly about how he's going to die. He makes every tense situation louder and more chaotic simply by being present. And the show treats all of this as comedy. Now here's the thing. Comedy is subjective. What one person finds hilarious, another person finds painful. And there are absolutely people who enjoy Zenitsu's brand of over-the-top panic and dramatic cowardice. In Japan, he is genuinely one of the most popular characters in the entire series. Popularity polls have consistently placed him near the top. His voice actor, Hiro Shimono, delivers the performance with total commitment and clearly has fun with the role. And there's a cultural context here that matters. The archetype of the cowardly, loud, emotional comic relief character has a much longer and more accepted history in Japanese manga and anime than it does in Western media. Characters like Usopp in One Piece fill a similar role and are beloved by Japanese audiences for many of the same reasons Zenitsu is. The humor translates differently across cultures, but even accounting for cultural differences, Zenitsu has a problem that goes beyond whether his comedy lands. And that problem is tonal consistency. Because Demon Slayer is not a comedy. It's a show about a boy whose entire family was murdered. It's a show about people fighting for their lives against monsters that eat human beings. It's a show where beloved characters die brutal, heartbreaking deaths. It's a show that wants you to feel deep, genuine emotion during its most important moments. The soundtrack swells. The animation reaches its peak. The voice actors pour everything they have into scenes of loss and sacrifice and determination. The show takes itself very seriously during these moments. And it should. Those moments are the best thing about Demon Slayer. But then Zenitsu shows up and starts screaming at the top of his lungs for 5 straight minutes, and the entire mood gets shattered into a million pieces. This isn't a small issue. This is a fundamental tonal clash that runs through the entire show. The series will spend 20 minutes building tension, creating atmosphere, establishing stakes, making you feel the weight of the danger these characters are in. And then Zenitsu will do something like collapse on the ground and wail about how he doesn't want to die, and the whole thing deflates. It's like watching a really gripping horror movie and then someone's phone goes off in the theater. The spell is broken. And Demon Slayer breaks its own spell constantly through Zenitsu. And it's not just the screaming and crying, although that alone has driven viewers away. It's his behavior toward Nezuko, which as the series goes on becomes increasingly hard to watch. Zenitsu is obsessed with Nezuko from the moment he first sees her. He declares that he's going to marry her. He talks about her constantly. He gets jealous when other male characters are near her. He follows her around. He makes comments about her appearance. And all of this is directed at a girl who cannot speak, cannot respond, and on at least one occasion physically runs away from him. There's a scene that fans bring up often where Nezuko is literally fleeing from Zenitsu, and he's chasing after her. It's played for laughs. The music is lighthearted. The animation style shifts to that exaggerated comedic look that anime uses for funny moments. But if you take away the funny music and the exaggerated art style and just look at what's actually happening in the scene, it's a boy chasing a girl who is running away from him because she does not want to be near him. That's what's happening. And the show wants you to laugh at it. Now in the manga's final chapter, it's revealed that Zenitsu and Nezuko end up together. They get married and have descendants who appear in the modern-day epilogue. And this is one of the most criticized story decisions in the entire series. because the show never built a genuine two-way relationship between them. Zenitsu's feelings for Nezuko are shown constantly. We know exactly how he feels, but Nezuko's feelings towards Zenitsu are almost completely absent from the story. She can't talk for most of the series, so she can't express interest or disinterest. She doesn't seek him out. She doesn't show signs of romantic affection. The closest thing to a mutual moment between them is Zenitsu giving her flowers once, which she seemed to appreciate. But one nice gesture does not build a relationship. Certainly not one that should lead to marriage. And so, when the manga tells us that they ended up together, it doesn't feel like the payoff of a love story. It feels like one character's obsession was rewarded simply because the story decided it should be. Nezuko didn't choose Zenitsu. The author chose for her. And given everything we've already talked about regarding Nezuko's complete lack of agency throughout the series, this ending only makes it worse. Even her romantic future was decided by someone else. But let's set aside the Nezuko dynamic and talk about Zenitsu's other major issue, which is that for the vast majority of the series, his cool moments only happen when he's unconscious. This is a central part of Zenitsu's character design. When he's awake, he's a coward. He can't fight. He panics. He runs. He's useless. But when he falls asleep or passes out from fear, a completely different version of Zenitsu takes over. Asleep Zenitsu is calm, focused, and devastatingly powerful. His thunder-breathing first form is one of the fastest and most lethal attacks in the entire series. When he's unconscious, he's arguably stronger than Tanjiro in a straight fight. And while this is a cool concept on paper, it creates a really frustrating viewing experience in practice, because it means that for most of the screen time Zenitsu gets, he's annoying. And the moments where he's awesome are moments where he's literally not conscious. The character the audience wants to see, the cool and powerful version, only exists when the character the audience has to sit through, the screaming, cowardly version, is switched off. It's like the show is saying, here's the version of Zenitsu you'll love, but you can only have him in small doses, and the rest of the time, you're stuck with the version that makes you want to mute your television. Now, I do want to be fair here because Zenitsu's character does improve over the course of the manga. Significantly, actually. And if you can make it through his worst stretches, there's a genuinely rewarding payoff waiting at the end. The turning point comes when Zenitsu learns that his former master, Jigoro Kuwajima, has died. Jigoro was the old man who trained Zenitsu in thunder breathing. He was the father figure Zenitsu never had, the person who believed in him when nobody else did. The man who saw potential in a scared, useless kid and turned him into a demon slayer. Jigoro committed seppuku, a ritual suicide, because of the shame and disgrace brought on by his other student, Kaigaku, who betrayed the Demon Slayer Corps and became a demon, specifically Upper Moon 6 after Daki and Gyutaro were defeated. When Zenitsu learns about Jigoro's death and Kaigaku's betrayal, something fundamentally changes in him. The screaming stops, the crying stops, the panic stops. For the first time in the entire series, Zenitsu is quiet, focused, and filled with a cold, determined rage. He walks into the Infinity Castle knowing that he's going to find Kaigaku, and he's going to end this. And when they finally face each other, Zenitsu doesn't scream, he doesn't run, he doesn't beg for his life. He fights with everything he has, including a technique he created himself, Thunder-breathing 7th form, Flaming Thunder God. A move that doesn't exist in the original thunder-breathing style because Zenitsu invented it. He created a new form, something his master could never teach him because it didn't exist until Zenitsu willed it into being. And he uses it to defeat Kaigaku and avenge the man who gave him everything. It's one of the best character moments in the entire series. It's emotional. It's earned. It's the payoff of everything Zenitsu has been through. And if this version of Zenitsu had been present earlier in the story, or if the balance between comedic Zenitsu and serious Zenitsu had been handled more carefully, he could have been one of the best characters in the show instead of one of the most polarizing. But that's the problem. To get to that version of Zenitsu, you have to sit through hours and hours and hours of the other version first. And a lot of viewers simply cannot do it. The number of fans who have admitted to dropping Demon Slayer entirely because of Zenitsu is not small. Reddit threads, forum posts, TikTok comments, YouTube discussions, all filled with people saying some version of the same thing. I couldn't take it anymore. He ruined the show for me. I had to skip his scenes to keep watching. When a character is actively driving people away from your anime, when viewers are choosing to stop watching a show they otherwise enjoy because one character is that unbearable, that is a failure of character writing. Not because the character is unrealistic, Zenitsu's fear is actually one of the most realistic reactions any character in the show has. If any of us were forced to fight man-eating demons, we'd probably react a lot more like Zenitsu than like Tanjiro. But realism and entertainment are not the same thing, and a character who is realistically afraid, but presented in a way that makes the audience want to press the skip button, has not been written well enough, no matter how realistic the fear might be. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Zenitsu represents something that runs through all of Demon Slayer's issues. The show relies on familiar, well-worn anime tropes and archetypes, without ever stopping to think about whether those tropes are actually serving the story. And that habit of leaning on what's familiar rather than reaching for something original shows up in more places than just one character. It shows up in the entire way the show handles its power system, its training arcs, and its approach to the shonen genre as a whole. Section 9. The Shonen Formula Problem. Tropes without subversion. We've now spent a good amount of time going through the individual problems with Demon Slayer. The protagonist who doesn't grow, the villain who doesn't measure up, the female lead who can't speak, the story that follows a formula, the manga that was rushed, the comic relief character who drives people away. But all of these individual issues are connected to something larger, something that sits underneath all of them and ties them together. And that something is this. Demon Slayer uses every single trope in the shonen playbook, leans on them completely, and never once tries to challenge, twist, or improve on any of them. Now, before I go further, I should explain what I mean when I say tropes, because that's a word that gets thrown around a lot and can mean different things to different people. A trope is basically a pattern, a familiar element that shows up over and over again across different stories. Every genre has them. In horror movies, there's the trope of the character who goes to investigate a strange noise alone. In romantic comedies, there's the trope of the two main characters hating each other at first and then falling in love. In shonen anime, there's a whole collection of tropes that have been recycled across dozens of shows for decades, and Demon Slayer uses almost every single one of them. Using tropes is not automatically a bad thing. The best stories in any genre often use familiar patterns as a starting point and then do something interesting with them. They take something the audience recognizes and add a new twist, a new perspective, a new layer that makes the familiar feel fresh again. The worst stories just repeat the patterns without adding anything. They follow the recipe exactly as written, change nothing, and serve up the same dish the audience has eaten 100 times before. The question with Demon Slayer is which category it falls into, and unfortunately, the evidence overwhelmingly points toward the second one. Let's start with one of the most fundamental tropes in shonen anime, the power-up at the last second. This is the moment in a battle where the hero is losing, where everything seems hopeless, where the villain is stronger and the hero has nothing left. And then suddenly the hero finds a new level of strength, a new technique, a new form, a hidden reserve of power that they didn't know they had. And it arrives at exactly the right moment to turn the tide of the fight. This trope has existed in shonen anime for as long as the genre has existed. Goku goes Super Saiyan for the first time when Frieza kills Krillin. Naruto taps into the Nine Tails chakra when he's about to die. Ichigo in Bleach unlocks Bankai just in time to fight Byakuya. Deku in My Hero Academia accesses One for All at the exact moment he needs it. It's a pattern the audience knows by heart at this point, and Demon Slayer uses it constantly. Tanjiro's big power-up moments follow this pattern without any deviation. Against Rui on Mount Natagumo, Tanjiro is losing badly. He's been cut up, his sword is broken, he's on the ground. And then he remembers his father performing the Hinokami Kagura dance. He remembers the flames, he remembers the breathing. And in that moment, he accesses a completely new ability, a fire-based attack that he's never used before, and uses it to cut Rui's threads and nearly take his head off. In the Entertainment District arc against Daki, the same thing happens. Tanjiro is getting beaten. He's running out of energy. Things look hopeless. And then the Hinokami Kagura kicks in again, and he goes on the offensive. In the Swordsmith Village arc against Hantengu's clones, the same pattern. Pushed to the limit, new ability surfaces, tide turns. Now, there's nothing wrong with a hero getting stronger during a fight. That's part of the excitement of shonen anime. But the best versions of this trope come with a cost. When Goku goes Super Saiyan, it's triggered by genuine grief and rage over his best friend's death, and the transformation changes who Goku is in that moment. He becomes colder, more ruthless, more focused. It's not just a power boost, it's a character shift. When Naruto uses the Nine-Tails chakra, it puts him at risk of losing control and being consumed by the fox demon inside him. The power comes at a price. Every time he uses it, there's a genuine danger that he'll lose himself. The power-up has tension built into it because you don't know if the cure will be worse than the disease. When Tanjiro accesses the Hinokami Kagura, the cost is that it hurts his body. He gets tired, he gets sore, and then he recovers and it's fine. There's no deeper consequence, no philosophical weight, no risk of losing something fundamental about himself. He just gets a cool new fire move and the fight continues. The trope is used, but nothing interesting is done with it. And then there's the power system itself. Breathing styles. This is the foundation of how combat works in Demon Slayer. Demon Slayers use special breathing techniques that enhance their physical abilities and allow them to perform powerful sword attacks. There are multiple breathing styles, each based on a natural element. Water breathing, flame breathing, thunder breathing, wind breathing, stone breathing, mist breathing, insect breathing, love breathing, serpent breathing, and at the top of them all, sun breathing, which is the original style that all others were derived from. Visually, the breathing styles are incredible. This is one of the areas where Ufotable's animation truly shines. When a character uses a breathing style, you see the element manifest around their blade. Water flows, flames erupt, lightning crackles. It looks absolutely stunning, and it's one of the biggest reasons fight scenes in Demon Slayer go viral. But behind the visual spectacle, the actual mechanics of the system are surprisingly shallow. Compare breathing styles to the power systems in other shonen anime. In Hunter x Hunter, the power system is called Nen. Nen has clearly defined categories. Each category has specific strengths and weaknesses. Characters are sorted into types based on their personality and natural tendencies. The rules of Nen are consistent and logical. And most importantly, Nen has built-in limitations. Characters can create powerful abilities, but those abilities come with conditions and restrictions. The more powerful the ability, the stricter the conditions have to be. This creates an entire layer of strategy underneath every fight. Characters don't just overpower each other. They outsmart each other. They set traps. They exploit the specific rules of their opponent's abilities. The audience has to think along with the characters because the system is deep enough to reward that kind of engagement. In Jujutsu Kaisen, the power system is cursed energy. Like Nen, it has defined rules and categories. Cursed techniques are unique to each sorcerer and often come with specific activation conditions, costs, and limitations. Domain expansion, the most powerful technique in the series, has specific rules about how it interacts with other domains and what happens when two domains clash. Fights in Jujutsu Kaisen are not just about who hits harder, they're about who understands the mechanics better and who can exploit the system more creatively. Demon Slayer's breathing styles don't operate on that level. There are no clearly defined rules about what a breathing style can and cannot do. There are no limitations beyond the user getting tired. There are no strategic interactions between different styles. A fight between two characters using different breathing styles doesn't play out any differently than a fight between two characters using the same one. The styles are essentially just different flavored sword attacks. Water breathing looks like water. Flame breathing looks like fire. But mechanically, they're all doing the same thing, which is cutting things with a sword, just with different visual effects. This means that fights in Demon Slayer almost always come down to the same thing. Who is stronger? Who can hit harder? Who can endure more damage? Who can pull out a new technique at the last second? There's very little room for strategy, for clever problem solving, for characters using their brains instead of their muscles to win a fight. And that makes the fights, as gorgeous as they look, less interesting from a storytelling perspective. Because when every fight is ultimately decided by one side being stronger or unlocking a new power, the outcomes become predictable. The tension isn't about how the hero will win, it's just about when the power-up will arrive. Now let's talk about the training arcs, because this is another area where the tropes are used but never elevated. Shonen anime loves a training arc. The hero is not strong enough. A mentor teaches them. They struggle. They push through. They come out stronger. It's one of the oldest patterns in the genre, and it can be really satisfying when done well. Demon Slayer has several training sequences. Tanjiro trains with Urokodaki before the final selection. He trains at the Butterfly Mansion after the Mugen Train events. The Hashira training arc is an entire arc dedicated to the Demon Slayers preparing for the final battle. And each of these follows the exact same format. Tanjiro is given a physical challenge. He struggles with it. He pushes himself to his limit. He eventually masters it. He moves on. There's no mental or emotional component to the training that changes who he is as a person. He doesn't learn something about himself that shifts his perspective. He doesn't face a psychological barrier that he has to work through. He just does physical exercises until he gets better at them. Compare this to the training arcs in Naruto, where Naruto's training often forces him to confront his own emotions. When Jiraiya trains him, it's not just about learning a new technique. It's about Naruto learning to channel the Nine Tails' power without being consumed by it, which is fundamentally a lesson about controlling his own anger and pain. When Naruto trains with Killer Bee to master the Nine Tails, he has to literally face a dark version of himself that represents all of his negative emotions. The training is external and internal at the same time. The physical challenge mirrors a psychological one. Or look at Hunter x Hunter, where Gon and Killua's training with Bisky and Greed Island isn't just about getting stronger. It's about understanding the deeper mechanics of Nen and learning to think strategically. The training makes them smarter, not just more powerful, and the skills they develop during training directly set up the creative solutions they use in future fights. The training has purpose beyond just leveling up. Demon Slayer's training arcs level Tanjiro up and nothing else. He gets physically stronger, he learns a new form or refines an existing one, and then he goes into the next fight. The training doesn't develop him as a character because there's nothing inside him that needs developing. He's already kind, already determined, already willing to sacrifice everything. The training is just there to justify why he can now beat a stronger enemy. It's a gameplay mechanic dressed up as a narrative beat. The Hashira themselves, while beloved by fans, also follow a trope pattern that the show never breaks from. Each Hashira has a tragic backstory. Each one lost someone important. Each one channels that pain into their fighting, and each one is willing to die for the cause. Rengoku lost his mother and watched his father give up on being a swordsman. Giyu lost his best friend during final selection. Shinobu lost her sister to a demon. Muichiro lost his twin brother. Obanai grew up imprisoned by a demon that ate his family. Sanemi had to kill his own demon-transformed mother. These backstories are effective individually. Some of them are genuinely heartbreaking. But when every single Hashira follows the same template of tragedy leading to purpose, leading to sacrifice, the pattern starts to feel less like individual character development and more like a formula being applied across the board. The show doesn't have a Hashira who joined for reasons other than personal tragedy. It doesn't have a Hashira who questions the mission or has doubts about the core. It doesn't have a Hashira whose motivation is complicated or morally gray. They all fit the same mold. Noble warrior haunted by pain fights to the death. It's a good mold, but it's still just a mold. And this is the core of the problem. Demon Slayer doesn't do anything wrong with these tropes. It executes them competently, sometimes even beautifully, thanks to Ufotable. But it never goes beyond execution. It never asks, what if we did this differently? It never tries to surprise the audience by zigging when every other shonen has zagged. It just follows the recipe perfectly, serves the dish with the most beautiful presentation you've ever seen, and expects you to call it a masterpiece because it looks incredible on the plate. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But looking incredible and tasting incredible are two different things, and every show that Demon Slayer gets compared to, every anime that sits in the greatest of all time conversation, earned its place there by adding something to the recipe that nobody had tasted before. Demon Slayer didn't add anything, and that matters, especially when you factor in the single biggest piece of external luck the franchise ever received. A global pandemic that cleared every competitor off the playing field at the exact moment Demon Slayer needed it most. Section 10. The COVID Effect. How a pandemic made Demon Slayer a cultural phenomenon. There's a conversation that Demon Slayer fans really don't like having, and it's not about the characters or the story or the animation. It's about timing. Specifically, it's about the fact that the single biggest moment in Demon Slayer's rise to global dominance, the release of the Mugen Train movie, happened during the most unusual period in modern entertainment history. A global pandemic. And while nothing about this takes away from the quality of the movie itself, ignoring the role that COVID played in Mugen Train's record-breaking success is like ignoring the wind when someone breaks a sprinting record running downhill. The achievement is still real, but the conditions it happened under were not normal, and pretending they were normal gives a false picture of what actually happened. Let's set the scene. By October of 2020, the world had been dealing with COVID for roughly 8 months. In most countries, movie theaters were either completely shut down or operating at heavily reduced capacity. Hollywood had essentially hit the pause button. Almost every major blockbuster that was supposed to come out in 2020 had been delayed. No Time to Die, the new James Bond movie, was pushed back. Black Widow was pushed back. Top Gun: Maverick was pushed back. Fast and Furious 9 was pushed back. The entire pipeline of major Western releases that would normally dominate the global box office simply wasn't there. The theaters were empty. Not because nobody wanted to go, but because there was nothing to go see. Japan was in a slightly different situation. By October 2020, the country was experiencing a period of relative calm in its COVID numbers. Restrictions had eased somewhat. Theaters were open. People were cautious, but they were allowed to go out. There was an enormous amount of pent-up demand for entertainment. Millions of people who had been stuck at home for months were desperate for something to do, somewhere to go, something to experience that felt normal again. And into that perfect vacuum stepped Demon Slayer: Mugen Train. The movie opened on October 16, 2020. It was released on 403 screens across Japan, including 38 IMAX theaters. And it didn't just do well, it did something that had never been done before. It made over $100 million in just 10 days. That was the fastest any film had ever reached that mark in Japanese history. Some theaters in Japan were screening the movie up to 40 times in a single day because there was literally nothing else to show, and the demand was overwhelming. The film sat at #1 at the Japanese box office for 12 consecutive weeks. 12 weeks. 3 straight months of being the top movie in the country, which in a normal year with normal competition would be almost impossible. By the end of its run, Mugen Train had made over $504 million worldwide. It became the highest-grossing film of 2020 across the entire planet. And here's the record that really matters. It became the first non-Hollywood production in the history of cinema to top the annual global box office. No Japanese film had ever done that. No non-American film of any kind had ever done that. And it happened during a year when Hollywood wasn't competing. That last part is the key, because Mugen Train didn't beat a lineup of major blockbusters to earn that title. It earned it in a year where there were almost no major blockbusters to compete against. The biggest Hollywood releases of 2020 were Bad Boys for Life, which came out in January before the pandemic hit, and Tenet, Christopher Nolan's time-bending action film, which underperformed because most theaters around the world were still closed when it released. Those were the competition, not Marvel movies, not Star Wars, not a single franchise tentpole that would normally dominate the global box office. They were all sitting on the shelf waiting for the pandemic to end. Now, does this mean Mugen Train isn't a good movie? Absolutely not. The film has a 98% score on Rotten Tomatoes from critics. American audiences gave it a 92% positive score in surveys. It won Animation of the Year at the Japan Academy Film Prize. It won Best Film at the Crunchyroll Anime Awards. By any critical measure, it's a well-made film that people genuinely enjoyed. The Rengoku story is emotional and well-told. The animation is stunning. The Akaza fight at the end is one of the best animated sequences in anime history. The movie earned a lot of its success on quality alone, but there is a massive difference between earning success on quality and earning the specific scale of success that Mugen Train achieved. And the specific scale, the $504 million, the highest-grossing film of the year, the first non-Hollywood production to top the global box office. That scale was directly shaped by the pandemic. In a normal year, with a normal release calendar, with Marvel and Disney and Warner Brothers all releasing their usual lineup of billion-dollar blockbusters, Mugen Train would have still been a hit. It would have probably been the highest-grossing anime film ever. But it would not have been the highest-grossing film of the year. It would not have topped the global box office. Because in a normal year, there would have been half a dozen Hollywood films making more money than it. And here's why this matters for the overrated conversation. Because those records, those headlines, those numbers, they became part of the Demon Slayer legend. They became proof, in the eyes of the fan base and the media, that Demon Slayer was not just a popular anime. It was a global cultural event. It was a mainstream entertainment powerhouse that could go toe-to-toe with Hollywood and win. And that narrative, that framing, inflated the perception of Demon Slayer beyond what the storytelling alone could justify. The franchise went from being a massively popular anime to being treated as one of the most important entertainment properties in the world. And a significant part of that leap happened not because the story got better, but because a pandemic cleared the field. The Mugen Train success then created a feedback loop. The box office records generated massive media coverage. The media coverage brought in new fans who might never have watched anime before. Those new fans watched the show, loved the animation, and joined a fan base that was already enormous. And because Mugen Train was many of these new fans' first real anime experience, they had nothing to compare it to. They didn't know that the story structure was formulaic because they hadn't seen the formula before. They didn't know that Tanjiro was a generic protagonist because they hadn't met the protagonist he was modeled after. Everything about Demon Slayer felt new and exciting to them, not because it was new, but because they were new to the genre. This isn't meant as an insult to those fans. Everyone starts somewhere. Everyone has a first anime that blows their mind and opens a door to a whole new world of entertainment. That's a beautiful thing, and I would never want to take that away from anyone. But the fact remains that a huge portion of Demon Slayer's fan base came to the series under conditions that were historically unique, and those conditions played a significant role in how big the franchise became and how highly it gets rated by the people who love it. Because when your introduction to anime is a show with the most beautiful animation in the industry, watched during a time when you were desperate for entertainment, promoted by record-breaking box office numbers that were inflated by a once-in-a-century pandemic, your perception of that show is going to be shaped by all of those factors. And separating the quality of the story from the circumstances of how you found it is harder than most people realize. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And this brings us to something even bigger. Because the pandemic inflated the numbers, and the numbers inflated the reputation. And the reputation created an expectation that Demon Slayer is one of the greatest anime ever made. But is it? Or is it just the most popular? Because those two things are not the same, and the difference between them might be the most important part of this entire conversation. Section 11. Popularity not equal to quality. The McDonald's of anime. So here we are. We've gone through the animation carrying the show. We've gone through the bland protagonist, the shallow villain, the silenced female lead, the generic story, the rushed ending, the divisive comic relief, the recycled tropes, the pandemic boost. And after all of that, there's one final argument that Demon Slayer fans always fall back on when everything else has been addressed. And it goes like this. If Demon Slayer is so overrated, why is it so popular? Why has it sold over 220 million manga copies? Why did its movies break every record? Why does everyone watch it? Surely all of those people can't be wrong. And on the surface, that feels like an unbeatable argument. How can something that millions and millions of people love be overrated? If that many people enjoy it, doesn't that prove it's great? And my answer to that is simple. No, it doesn't. Because popularity and quality are two completely different things. They overlap sometimes, but they are not the same measurement. And confusing them is one of the most common mistakes people make when evaluating any form of entertainment. Think about it outside of anime for a second. McDonald's is the most popular restaurant chain on the planet. It serves roughly 69 million customers every single day across over 40,000 locations worldwide. By every popularity metric that exists, McDonald's is the most successful food operation in human history. But nobody, not even the most devoted McDonald's fan, would argue that it's the best food in the world. Nobody would put a Big Mac on the same level as a meal from a world-class restaurant. McDonald's is popular because it's cheap, it's fast, it's everywhere, it's consistent, and it's easy to enjoy without thinking too hard about it. Those are strengths. Real, legitimate strengths. But they're not the same as being the best. Demon Slayer is the McDonald's of anime. And I don't mean that as an insult. I mean it as an observation about what the show actually is and why it became as big as it did. Demon Slayer is popular because it's accessible, because it's beautiful to look at, because it's emotionally simple in a way that doesn't require any prior knowledge of anime to enjoy, because it's short enough that anyone can watch the whole thing without committing months of their life, because its fight scenes look incredible in short clips on social media, because it arrived at the perfect time. All of these are real reasons for its success, and none of them have anything to do with the depth of its storytelling. And this is where social media plays a really interesting and honestly kind of misleading role in how Demon Slayer is perceived. Because the version of Demon Slayer that exists on TikTok and Instagram and Twitter is not the same show that you actually sit down and watch from beginning to end. The social media version of Demon Slayer is a highlight reel. It's the Rengoku versus Akaza fight. It's the Tanjiro Hinokami Kagura moment against Rui. It's the Entertainment District battle against Daki and Gyutaro. It's the most visually explosive, most emotionally intense, most jaw-dropping moments from the show. isolated from everything around them and presented as if that's what the entire experience is like. But it's not. The actual experience of watching Demon Slayer from start to finish includes a lot of slower-paced episodes. It includes long stretches of dialogue and setup. It includes Zenitsu screaming for extended periods. It includes training sequences that don't go anywhere emotionally. It includes repetitive story beats that follow the same pattern arc after arc. The show is not wall-to-wall spectacle. It has peaks and valleys like any other anime. But social media only shows the peaks. And for people who discover Demon Slayer through those clips, the expectation that gets set is wildly different from the reality. This creates a cycle. Someone sees an incredible Demon Slayer clip online. They decide to watch the show. The show is good, but not as consistently amazing as the clip suggested. But by that point, they're already invested in the community and the hype. And admitting that the show didn't live up to the highlights feels like admitting they were wrong. So they join the chorus of people calling it a masterpiece. The clips keep getting shared, and the next person who discovers the show goes through the same cycle. The hype feeds itself. And the gap between the social media version of Demon Slayer and the actual version of Demon Slayer keeps getting wider. There's another factor that plays into this, and it's what I'd call the gateway effect. For a huge number of anime fans, especially younger ones who got into anime in 2019 or later, Demon Slayer was their first anime, or at least the first one they watched seriously from start to finish. And your first anime is always special. It's the show that opened the door for you. It's the one that made you realize anime was something you could love. And because of that emotional connection, because of what the show represents in your personal journey as a fan, it's incredibly hard to evaluate it objectively. When Demon Slayer is your first anime and you watch Tanjiro fight with water breathing for the first time, it feels revolutionary. Those water effects, that animation quality, that music, it's unlike anything you've ever seen. And it is amazing. But it feels more amazing than it actually is because you have no frame of reference. You haven't seen what Ufotable did with the Fate series. You haven't seen what MAPPA did with Attack on Titan's final seasons or Jujutsu Kaisen. You haven't seen what Madhouse did with Hunter x Hunter or One Punch Man. You haven't seen what Bones did with Mob Psycho 100. Demon Slayer isn't doing something that nobody else has done. It's doing something that you haven't seen yet because you're new. And there's a huge difference between those two things. None of this is meant to make anyone feel bad for loving Demon Slayer. If it's your favorite anime, that's completely valid. Enjoyment is personal, and nobody gets to tell you what you should or shouldn't love. But there's a difference between saying, "I love this show," and saying, "This show is one of the greatest ever made." The first statement is about you. The second statement is about the show. And when we're evaluating the show on its own merits, separate from personal attachment, and separate from how big the fan base is, Demon Slayer has real, significant weaknesses that the shows it gets compared to simply don't have. Consider the anime that consistently show up in greatest of all time conversations, and what separates them from Demon Slayer. Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood tells a story about grief, sacrifice, and the cost of power that builds to one of the most satisfying conclusions in anime history. Every character arc pays off. Every plot thread gets resolved. The villain has a philosophy that mirrors and challenges the heroes. The world building is rich and detailed. Vinland Saga tells a story about violence and revenge and whether a person can truly change after a lifetime of bloodshed. Its protagonist goes through one of the most dramatic character transformations in the genre. Monster tells a story about the nature of evil that operates more like a psychological thriller than an anime, and treats its audience like adults. Mob Psycho 100 takes the overpowered protagonist trope and turns it into a story about emotional growth and self-worth that is genuinely unlike anything else in the genre. These shows aren't just popular, they're deep. They challenge their audiences. They have something to say beyond the surface-level plot. They take the tropes of their genre and use them to explore ideas that stay with you long after you finish watching. Demon Slayer doesn't do that. It's entertaining, it's beautiful, it's fun. But when you turn it off and walk away, what idea does it leave you with? What question does it ask that you're still thinking about a week later? What perspective does it offer that you've never considered before? For me, the answer is nothing. And for a show that gets treated like one of the all-time greats, nothing is not good enough. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But let me be very clear about something. Saying that Demon Slayer is overrated is not the same as saying it's bad. And as we wrap this whole thing up, I think it's really important that we're honest about what Demon Slayer actually is, what it isn't, and why both of those things matter. Because the truth about this show is more interesting than either the haters or the superfans want to admit. Section 12. The verdict. What Demon Slayer actually is. So here we are. After everything we've gone through, after all the evidence and all the arguments and all the comparisons, we've arrived at the question that this entire video has been building toward. Is Demon Slayer overrated? And I think the honest answer, the answer that respects both the show's real strengths and its real weaknesses, is yes. But with a very important note attached to it. Demon Slayer is overrated, but it is not bad, and those two things can exist at the same time. In fact, I think understanding the difference between those two things is the entire point of this conversation. Let me explain what I mean by going back through everything we've covered, because when you lay it all out side by side, the picture becomes pretty clear. We started by looking at the sheer scale of Demon Slayer's success. Over 220 million manga copies sold, the fourth best-selling manga of all time. 2 movies that are the highest-grossing anime films in history, with Mugen Train at over $504 million and Infinity Castle surpassing $555 million. The manga outsold every other series in Japan in 2020, ending One Piece's 11-year reign. By every commercial metric that exists, Demon Slayer is one of the most successful entertainment franchises on the planet. That success is real. Nobody can take it away. But then we looked at what's actually underneath that success. And what we found was a series that, while beautifully produced, has significant storytelling problems that the anime community as a whole has been pointing out for years. We looked at Ufotable's animation and how the manga was a modest performer for 3 full years before the anime transformed it into a global phenomenon. The story didn't change. The characters didn't change. What changed was how it looked. And while animation alone doesn't explain everything about Demon Slayer's popularity, Ufotable's comparison with their own Fate series work proves that when the same elite animation is paired with a less accessible story, the result is a popular but niche hit instead of a worldwide event. The animation is doing most of the heavy lifting. That's not an opinion. That's a pattern backed by evidence. We looked at Tanjiro Kamado and how his complete absence of meaningful character flaws, internal conflict, or moral growth makes him one of the flattest protagonists in modern shonen anime. A character whose personality is entirely made up of positive traits that never get challenged, never waver, and never evolve. A character who is consistently outshone by his own supporting cast. A character whose fans almost never name him as their favorite in the show he leads. Compared to protagonists like Eren Yeager, Yuji Itadori, or Edward Elric, Tanjiro feels like a placeholder. Functional, but forgettable. We looked at Muzan Kibutsuji, and how after 1,000 years of existence, the main villain of the series has a paper-thin backstory, a single, shallow motivation, no unique fighting abilities, and a track record of strategically terrible decisions. Like wiping out his own Lower Moon army out of wounded pride. A villain who is consistently less interesting, less tragic, and less threatening than his own subordinates. When Akaza, Kokushibo, Daki, and Gyutaro all have richer stories than the Demon King himself, something has gone wrong with how the antagonist was written. We looked at Nezuko Kamado and how the most important character in the story, the person the entire plot revolves around, is silenced by a bamboo muzzle, denied inner thoughts, robbed of agency, infantilized beyond what any other demon in the series experiences, and eventually presented in ways that are uncomfortable given her age and her inability to consent to any of it. A character who is treated more like a merchandise mascot than a person. Every other demon in the series can speak and express complex thoughts. Nezuko is the sole exception, and the story never adequately justifies why. We looked at the plot itself and how it follows the standard shonen formula, step by step, arc by arc, without ever once attempting to subvert, challenge, or add anything new to the template. A repeating cycle of demon encounter, tragic backstory flashback, last-second power-up, and compassionate death that works the first time, but becomes predictable long before the story ends. A world with no political depth, no social commentary, and no layers beyond the surface-level conflict between demon slayers and demons. We looked at the rushed ending and how the manga's 205 chapters simply were not enough to properly develop the Hashira, resolve character arcs with care, or give the final battle the room it needed to breathe. How creator Koyoharu Gotoge was dealing with personal and family issues that forced her to bring the story to a close faster than planned. How characters like Nakime never even received backstories in the manga, and had to have their histories published separately in a supplementary book. How the epilogue jumped to a modern-day time skip with no transition, no aftermath, and no emotional decompression after the most intense arc in the series. We looked at Zenitsu Agatsuma and how his constant screaming, his obsessive behavior toward Nezuko, and his dramatic cowardice have driven a significant number of viewers to actually stop watching the show entirely. A character whose eventual growth in the Infinity Castle arc is genuinely rewarding, but requires sitting through hours of the most grating version of him first. A character whose romantic pairing with Nezuko in the epilogue was never developed from her side and feels like the author decided it rather than the characters earning it. We looked at how Demon Slayer uses every major shonen trope without deepening any of them. A power system that is visually spectacular but mechanically shallow compared to Nen or Cursed Energy. Training arcs that build physical strength but never psychological depth. Power-ups that arrive at convenient moments without meaningful cost. A full roster of Hashira who all follow the same tragic backstory template without variation. We looked at the COVID effect and how Mugen Train's record-breaking box office run happened during a year when Hollywood had essentially stopped releasing movies. How Japanese theaters were showing the film up to 40 times a day because there was nothing else to screen. How the movie's success, while partially earned on quality, was massively inflated by a once-in-a-century set of circumstances that will likely never be repeated. And we looked at how all of this feeds into a culture where popularity is mistaken for quality, where the social media version of Demon Slayer, the highlight reel of its greatest moments, creates expectations that the actual show doesn't consistently meet, where being many people's first anime gives it an emotional significance that has nothing to do with how good the writing actually is. So what is Demon Slayer? Here's what I think it is, honestly and fairly. Demon Slayer is a beautifully animated, emotionally accessible, highly entertaining shonen anime that executes a familiar formula at an extremely high production level. It has a simple story that is easy to follow and easy to enjoy. It has an emotional core built around a brother's love for his sister that is genuinely touching. It has fight scenes that are among the most visually impressive in the history of the medium. It has a supporting cast of Hashira who are memorable and beloved for good reason. It has demon villains with backstories that can genuinely make you cry. And it has a level of mainstream crossover appeal that very few anime have ever achieved. All of that is real. All of that is worth celebrating. But it is not a masterpiece. It is not one of the greatest anime ever made. It does not belong in the same tier as Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, Attack on Titan, Hunter x Hunter, Vinland Saga, or Monster when it comes to the quality and depth of its storytelling. Those shows earned their place in that conversation by doing things that Demon Slayer never attempts. They challenged their audiences. They subverted expectations. They created protagonists who grew and changed in ways that were unpredictable and profound. They built worlds with layers that rewarded deeper thinking. They asked questions that didn't have easy answers. Demon Slayer gives you easy answers every time. And easy answers are comfortable, and comfortable is enjoyable, but comfortable is not great. Demon Slayer is a very good anime that gets treated like a perfect one. And that gap between very good and perfect is what makes it the most overrated anime ever made. Not bad, not terrible, not unwatchable. Just rated higher than it deserves by a fan base that fell in love with how the show looks and never stopped to ask whether the story underneath matched the visuals on top. And maybe that's okay. Maybe not every show needs to be a masterpiece. Maybe some shows are just meant to be enjoyed without overthinking them. But if we're going to have honest conversations about anime, if we're going to rank these shows and compare them and argue about which ones deserve to be called the greatest, then we have to be honest about what each show actually brings to the table. And Demon Slayer brings a beautiful table with incredible decorations and stunning presentation. But when you sit down and actually eat the meal, it tastes like something you've had before. Delicious enough, but not unforgettable. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. I have another deep dive coming soon that I think you're really going to love. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.